Welcome to Sacred Realms. It's a great day in Hyrule, y'all. Welcome to Sacred Realms, a Zelda Retrospective Podcast. I'm your host, Lyndon Willoughby. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Matt Willoughby. Matt, it's almost Thanksgiving time.
It is 2 days before Thanksgiving time at the time of this recording. And, you know, Lyndon, I have to say, Thanksgiving is honestly in the top tier of holidays, in my opinion. And I know that's kind of a controversial opinion, especially for anyone who doesn't, like have a Thanksgiving in their country, like some people who are joining us today. But
and also those who are chronically unthankful.
Yeah, I love Thanksgiving.
Anywhere in the world.
I think it's a fun holiday. I love getting around and having a bunch of good food and watching a football game and just like hanging out with family and friends.
I will say I really do feel for the person who, through no fault of their own, is just not that into the kinds of food that you get at a Thanksgiving dinner, and thus the holiday is not as fun for them. Like
absolutely,
that's a tough situation to be in, and that's unenviable. I love Thanksgiving food, turkey and stuffing and all the veggies and potatoes and everything. So it's like, there's a lot for me to love there, but yeah.
A well-cooked turkey, honestly, I think is my second favorite holiday food behind like prime rib. I would much rather have a well-cooked turkey than like the best cooked ham. I think ham is super mid-tier as far as holiday foods go.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. But thankfully, I don't think anyone's going to try and feed us ham on Thursday, Matt. I think it's going to be turkeys all the way down. So
well, and we're doing a little bit of weird Thanksgiving because, people in our family who are married have family in town so we're having to like split holidays. We're actually doing like a brunch with our immediate family. So we're doing like a crepe buffet on Thursday morning, which is actually going to be really fun.
Okay.
I'm kind of looking forward to that.
You had me at crepe buffet. That sounds neat.
It doesn't sound kind of fun.
It does sound like a lot of fun. You know who I am not 100% sure whether or not they're going to be enjoying a crepe buffet this week?
Would that be our guest of the evening?
That'd be our guest of the evening.
Oh, yeah. See, that was a good guess on my part.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this episode of the show, The Wonder from Down Under, our friend Cody Davies. How you doing, Cody?
The Obama of Australia himself.
But not the Ned Stark of Australia, as we've just determined.
No, I mean, you wouldn't want to be the Ned Stark of Australia, considering what he's famous for is dying, which I would like to not be famous for. So,
yes.
Though, of course, we have a famous Ned who's famous for dying in Australia called Ned Kelly, and he's quite popular. But for killing a bunch of people and shooting a bunch of police and stuff, the normal stuff that makes people popular.
Isn't that the guy that wore that like full suit of cast iron armor around at one point, like that I've seen online?
Yeah,
somebody else.
Same guy?
Yeah, no, that's him. Ned Kelly. I don't know if you know much about him, but he's basically he's a bushranger, meaning he was a bandit, basically. But, bushrangers had a bit of, romance about them in terms of the storytelling of like, they're out, out in the wilds,
He's kind of like y'all's Billy the Kid or something.
I was going to say he's the Zorro of Australia.
No, but Zorro was more like a Robin Hood kind of character. He wasn't, Zorro was like, He did bad things to rich people, but good things to poor people. I get the impression Ned Kelly may not have done that particularly.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think Billy the Kid is probably more apt.
But
fine. You can be right this time.
I mean, that's pretty normal for us.
Because in the Pokemon anime, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but the Team Rocket villains are always named after famous like villainous duos or villainous people, and then they split it. Like Jesse and James were Jesse James.
Yeah.
And so and that was a translation of, different names in Japanese that had the same sort of joke. So if it was in Australia, if they were translating it to Australia, they'd be called Ned and Kelly.
I think that would be a fun Team Rocket duo.
Ned and Kelly.
So that just came to my mind, and I thought, wow, when I'm going to have to suggest that whenever they finally get around to the Australia generation of Pokemon where it's set in Australia, they'll have to bring on Ned and Kelly. So
yeah, I was going to say you should probably go ahead and try to dig up the mailing address for the Pokemon Company. And just have that letter ready to go at a moment's notice. Maybe just write it in advance.
Oh yeah, I'll write it in advance, and then as soon as I see a Nintendo Direct where they're showing off all of these new poison type Pokemon, I'll be like, oh, this must be the Australia generation. Right.
Well, that'll probably be next week at the rate that they're cranking out Pokemon games over there right now.
God, seriously.
Yeah. But yes, talk to your earlier point, we do not have Thanksgiving here. We do celebrate Halloween, but that's a little controversial. Like the boomers are always like, well, that's an American holiday. Why are we being affected by that American culture? Whereas the young people just want to be able to dress up in costumes and that sort of thing. And so they do that for fun. But there is a bit of a cultural backlash that those Americans are getting in and, ruining our grand old British holidays.
Well, Americans are kind of famous for ruining lots of things around the world. So that kind of tracks.
Do the British not celebrate Halloween?
I think they might celebrate it in the same way that Australia does, in that it's not a natural holiday for them, but it's something that's just gotten picked up because the idea of kids being able to dress up and stuff is once a year just is fun.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm glad that y'all have Halloween. Is there any kind of festive observance of anything between Halloween and Christmas in Australia?
Not really. We have so there are some holidays that we sort of, are more into than America is. Like Easter is a much bigger deal here than it is in America. And so that's the big one where a couple months before, in January, as soon as all the Christmas stuff is done, the shops start stocking chocolate eggs and chocolate rabbits and stuff, because that's the Easter experience. So
that's fascinating. And that also kind of, I guess that means that Easter completely rolls over Valentine's Day in Australia.
Well, Easter is March, April typically, and then and Valentine's Day is in February. So it's sort of, there's a chocolate season of 3 months.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing I've ever heard in the world, to be completely honest with you. So, well, anyway, we'll be sure to, as soon as January 2nd rolls around, we'll be sure to send you a ping and let you know that happy Easter, Cody. It's officially here now. So, yeah.
Yeah, Christmas starts even earlier for us than it does for you, because you at least have a holiday in between. We sort of have Halloween, and then after that it's Christmas time in terms of stocking at the shops and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, the funny thing is that the ongoing cultural conversation in America usually centers around, the whether or not to decorate for Christmas before actual Thanksgiving. And people seem to be pretty clearly divided into two camps on that issue, with some people throwing the decorations up right after Halloween and some people strictly observing a no mixing of Thanksgiving and Christmas decorative season. So I did a little mixture of both this year. The wife and I decided that it was time for the tree to go up a few days in advance of Thanksgiving, mostly just because I didn't want to screw around with it this weekend when I'm coming down off my turkey coma. So we do, of course, have things going on in our lives besides holidays that we're observing. One of those things is that we're all playing The Legend of Zelda on a weekly basis.
It's almost like we're here to talk about that.
I know. It's wild.
Weird.
It's crazy. I don't know how we got here. 3 years later. Of course, the game that we're playing at the moment is The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and we're coming very close to the end of that game experience. Things are really starting to wind down. Cody, this is the first time that we have had you on this show for this season. It's actually far later in the season than we usually get to catch up with you on the game that we're playing. I believe that you actually had kind of hung back a little bit and didn't dive directly into this one as quickly as you have some of the others.
Yeah, I mean, look, so there are 2 Zelda games that I'm currently unable to play. And those are the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess.
Wonder why.
And yeah, my relevant old consoles, I believe, are in a different continent. For those particular games, and for some reason, beyond mortal understanding, Nintendo refuses to port them to the Switch, where they could make easy millions of dollars. But yeah. So I've played Twilight Princess probably twice, like once on the original launch and once on the Wii U launch. But I'm about. When would it have launched on the Wii U, do you think?
I think we decided 2015 is when it came out on the Wii U.
Yeah, so it would have been about 8 years or so since I last played it, but it's I've still got plenty of thoughts and opinions on it.
Well, that's good, because I feel like this is an episode where thoughts and opinions are going to abound. We have some developments to talk about, some heel turns of character. Really, some choices were made here, and I can't wait to get into the discussion. Cody, before we do that, I'd love to get some of your thoughts generally, as we do the first time we bring somebody on in a season of the show, to, give us some of the background that you have with this game. Obviously, you've already told us how many times that you've played it, but I don't think we've had much of a conversation before about, like, your history with it. Did you buy it day one? On what console?
How do you feel about it generally?
How do you feel about it? Where does it live in any list that you might have? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, so I originally played it on the Wii. The GameCube version is probably slightly better, to be honest, because the Wii didn't really add that much to it. Was the waggle gimmick didn't particularly add to it, I think. I played it on the Wii, and my thoughts were basically, this is creatively bankrupt.
Wow. Those are some strong terms. That's phrasing this game in a much stronger light than I think we've even committed to.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, I mean, so I've softened on it over time. Like, so this is the thing about the entire era after about the Wind Waker and before A Link Between Worlds, the Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess era was the point at which just me as a longtime Zelda fan was awaiting new developments, and we kept getting Ocarina of Time. And so, and sort of kept leaning into a certain direction for the series. And so that was really frustrating to me. And sort of all of those games sort of lowered in my rankings just from the relative expectations as opposed to how good the game is as a standalone video game. Because that's the thing. If someone was new to the series, I would have no problems recommending Twilight Princess to them. My frustrations aren't with it as a video game. They're sort of with it as a meta thing about the franchise as a whole. Because I think, and to be clear, I rate this game, I don't know, it's like 7th or 8th or something on my Zelda game list. Like it's at the bottom of the 3D Zelda games, but it's still, I don't hate it. I haven't put it below Zelda 2 or anything. It is a great video game. But I was just frustrated by all of the examples of, I guess, where they're sticking to the formula in ways that are detrimental. Like the overworld is a big empty overworld that's there because there was a big overworld in Ocarina of Time, you know, and then you see the sort of negative effects of that. Or like you get a slingshot because you got to have a slingshot, and then it's instantly made useless by like a bow in the first dungeon. You know, and all of the dungeon items that had great uses inside the dungeon, but then were completely irrelevant afterwards. To me, all of that was sort of part of this is real by the numbers Ocarina of Time stuff that hasn't really analyzed why they did that stuff in Ocarina of Time so much as trying to recreate it. And those criticisms, they still exist. I think those things are still all valid, but I do think, back then I was probably a bit too harsh on it as a video game because it's still, it's still a good Zelda game and everything, but there are just a few areas that I just didn't appreciate it. Like there's things that Phantom Hourglass, for example, I know you two are not the biggest fans of Phantom Hourglass, but when it comes to dungeon items and their use in the overworld and that sort of thing, I think that game does a much better job at that than Twilight Princess. I don't know.
Well, I think that's an undisputed area of excellence for Phantom Hourglass is the items. Like I don't think anybody could mount much of an argument against that point.
But those games were released about a year apart. So like this was the same, teams and everything. Anyway, I'll let you give your thoughts on my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I guess I just wanted to talk about it from the other end of things. Like you say, you acknowledge that Twilight Princess is a good video game. You have frustrations with it in terms of its historical context with Zelda overall. But like, what are some things that you do you think that it adds anything to Zelda, like as a Zelda game?
I think some of its high points are some of the highest in the series. In terms of dungeons, in terms of the companion character, Midna, I think they're fairly undisputed high points in the series as a whole. So there are things that, and the storytelling sort of amped up in terms of the traditional narrative, linear storytelling. It was sort of a big, it was big, it was grand. It was dark and edgy, or not really, but that was sort of how it was marketed in comparison to the Wind Waker, which had gotten the, all of the mats of the world were saying, this is too goofy.
I am quoted as saying that, yes.
And and then they saw the Twilight Princess trailer where there's, serious Link with real graphics and, that sort of thing. I think it does have interesting things going for it. But in terms of the formula, it's probably the game that changes things up the least of any Zelda game.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair observation. And, what I will say is that of all the people that we've talked to, lower, or I guess higher middle of the pack seems pretty standard for this placement of the game, sort of no matter where anybody, like whatever macro issues people seem to have with it in terms of that larger Zelda series conversation, it does tend to be landing smack dab in the middle of most people's lists, unless your name is Stephanie, and then it's at the very top. But
look, there are people. There's the people who really like, young adult Link, and then there's the people who really like wolves. And those groups of people made a lot of fan art and had a lot of fun for many decades after its release. And I think that Link, some of these character designs and stuff were the stock standard. Like Twilight Princess Link was the Link that I would see everywhere for basically until Breath of the Wild Link. That was like standard Link for a long time.
Yeah, which I think we mentioned a few weeks ago is really weird, given that there was kind of an actually newer take on Link that existed between those two games for a long time too. Like Skyward Sword Link never really got his due in the in terms of exposure the way that Twilight Princess Link did. So
yeah, I mean, Skyward Sword, I think it got the brunt of that feeling that I was talking about, because I was on it a bit earlier in terms of the sort of tiredness of just, that formula being repeated, back in like 2006. But by 2011, that had become the sort of inside the fandom, the sort of wish for some breaking out of the box stuff had become very strong in certain areas of the community, I think. And so the linearity of Skyward Sword and that was quite poorly received by a lot of those people. But I think that doesn't speak to all Zelda fans. There are people who say, well, Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, that's real Zelda. This new Zelda isn't really Zelda, etc. So it really is a split depending on what you come to the series for, on
sure
whether you like it or not.
Do you personally think that Skyward Sword is less deserving of that criticism than Twilight Princess is? The originality within Zelda criticism?
I think it was I think Skyward Sword was trying more things than Twilight Princess was. Like, it legitimately was trying to. You'll get some developer quotes and things around the time where they're talking about things that sound almost like Breath of the Wild, because they're talking about like getting rid of the distinction between overworld and dungeon and all these kinds of things. But the difference is, for Skyward Sword, they meant getting rid of the distinction between overworld and dungeon, because the overworld's a dungeon and the dungeon's a dungeon. Whereas it was the opposite in Breath of the Wild. They were getting rid of the distinction because the dungeon was an overworld and the overworld was an overworld. So in that sense, they were both mixing up the formula equally, but they sort of focused on opposite parts of the Zelda formula.
Yeah. I was going to say, it came about it two completely different ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a fair observation. Cool. Well, thanks for giving us a little bit of your background with this game, Cody. I think we'll probably get into some more observations and honestly frequent historical criticisms about Twilight Princess, especially from a plot standpoint, as we get further into this episode.
And this episode's great for that, right? Like this is kind of, we had a really cool turning point back in Arbiter's Grounds and Sacred Grove, where we move into the secondary part and we move away from the character driven stories to the world stories and the MacGuffin stories and the backstory. And now we're firmly into we're back into characters, but instead of our main cast of supporting characters, we're on our villains and we're on our companion character more. So like it's cool to kind of see Twilight Princess break these phases, right? And I think that's been kind of fun. And I think there's just a lot to talk about character-wise here.
Yep, I completely agree. Let's go ahead and get the housekeeping out of the way and then dive into that discussion, because I'm really, really excited to talk about it. If you didn't know, Sacred Realms is a weekly re-examination of The Legend of Zelda, one little slice at a time. Sacred Realms drops every Wednesday and is available on all major podcast networks. Every week we play a new section of a Zelda game, and then we sit down here to talk and to drop our hot takes. If that sounds fun to you, please head over to Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, be sure to leave us a review. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated, and they have a chance to get a shout out here on the show. If you want more Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/sacredrealmspod and get access to our Discord channel, bonus episodes, listener mail, vote on what game we play next, and much, much more. That poll is still up at the moment. It doesn't close as of this recording for another 8 days. It closes at 11:59 p.m. Central Time on November the 29th. Although, as of this recording, Minish Cap has taken what could be called a commanding lead. It's looking like the favorite to to take up season 11 of our podcast. So
I want you to be forced to do Spirit Tracks.
You're one of those.
You and several other vocal people who really want us to suffer. It'll happen. It'll happen eventually. We are going to play it, and then your time will come. You can watch us writhe in misery. But until then, looks like it's going to be Minish Cap up next, which is exciting because I've been in a ferocious mood to play that game for about 4 years now.
Yeah, dude, I'm very excited, and even more excited that it's on the Switch now, and it's not going to be hard for us to find.
I know, or hard for our listeners to find. I mean,
right?
You know, like one of the things that's been kind of a downer about this season and the last season is that honestly, they were both Phantom Hourglass and Twilight Princess, both sort of difficult games to get a hold of if you didn't save those consoles or if you didn't buy into them at a certain specific time. So
and if you didn't have a copy of the game going into this season, you're dropping $100 on eBay for one.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's just not fun.
Yeah, so definitely very excited to have something that's just broadly accessible. I feel like most people have a Switch, so you know.
At least most of our listeners.
Yeah, definitely so. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, one of the benefits that Master Sword patrons and above get is that we read their names every week here on the show. Those legendary individuals are Joseph, Nintendo, Adam, Sakura Sky, Art, Jeremy, Cosmic, Link, Tom, Andy, Stephanie, Billy, Connor, Rachel, Shepherd Street, Matthew, Chris, Daniel, Fallout 907, Kelso, Chris, Tiffany the Star, Daxel, Patrice, Stephanie, Darknuck, Il Maestro himself, Brian, George, Mike, Dylan, Lennon, Kolku, Aiden, Rowan, Josh, Nick, Dante, Gep, Brittany, Davey, Haru the Mighty, Derek, Albert, Mark, Andy, Cameron, Ben, Daniel, Nick D _TV, Travis, Hyrule Interviews, aka our guest of last week and 2 times previous to that in this season, Max Nichols, Garrett, and Drew. These are the most legendary of individuals, and I would walk through a cursed mirror into an alternate realm with any of them any day of the week.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
I'll do that.
You're way more game for that than I was thinking you were going to be. I thought that was going to be like an easy veto. For me,
you know, I mean, alternate dimensions and realities can be fun. I'd give it a shot.
I feel like they can just as often not be fun.
Absolutely, but it's at least a coin toss. Unlike the desert, which always sucks.
Okay, so that's fair. The other thing that we got to do before we get into our conversation about this week's chunk of game is Whiskey Bit.
Yay! If you don't like Whiskey Bit, go ahead and hit forward 30 seconds because we're going to keep doing it.
Sorry about that.
If you don't like it, there's a fast forward button for a reason.
There is. I think most people actually don't really mind, but we got like one comment on the internet last week that was just kind of like, I hate Whiskey Bit. And I'm like,
don't care.
Well, we are talking about things that we like. I'm sorry.
This is free content and we don't run ads, so we're going to do Whiskey Bit.
There you go. All right. The whiskey that we're enjoying this evening is Wild Turkey Rare Breed. Of course, we've had the Rare Breed Bourbon or the Rare Breed Rye before. This is the Wild Turkey Rare Breed Barrel Proof Bourbon. So it's going to be a little sweeter, a little less spicy than the rye. This clocks in at 116.8 proof and is a wonderful cold weather whiskey.
Rare Breed is one of the best, and every batch is a little bit different because it's always right out of a different cask, so it's always a little unique.
Truly one of the best bourbons that I think anybody can buy for $45.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Always good.
To our boy Zant, who...
to Zant. Cheers to Zant.
Who truly deserved better things. Okay.
Amen.
And without further ado, let's talk about what we played. We do that every week in the Sacred Realms Rundown, which is a 6-part analysis of what we played this week and the feelings that it made us feel. Today, we are covering Twilight Princess Chapter 10. Part 1 of the Sacred Realms Rundown is, as always, the plot recap, read by Matt. Take it away, Matt.
We set foot back on the walkway in the sky city of the Uka and say a fond farewell to our feathered friend Uku as she rejoins her kin. The trip back to Lake Hylia is quick, thanks to the local cannon, which is a twin of the one that got us up here in the first place. And we're beyond grateful to be back beneath the clouds where we belong. We don't rest long in the cool waters of the lake because we finally have what we need to repair the Mirror of Twilight, allowing us to enter the Twilight Realm and challenge the Imposter King at last. With the shards safely tucked away, we warp back to the Mirror Chamber to embark on the next step of our quest. As we land back in the arid air of the desert, we approach the shattered mirror and watch in awe as the mirror magically repairs itself with the shards that we have collected. As it does, the chains holding up the obsidian monolith disappear and the stone drops to the ground, embedding itself in the deep sand. The mirror then shines a bright and unnatural white light, which projects a swirling pattern of symbols and letters upon the black stone. And as we watch, the projection seems to take on a dimension of depth that goes into the fathomless blackness. Some call our realm a world of shadows, but that makes it sound unpleasant. The twilight there holds a serene beauty. You've seen it for yourself as the sun sets on this world. Bathed in that light, all the people were pure and gentle, until that foul power pervaded our world. Midna says all of this while looking wistfully at the magical portal that has opened up in front of us. As she finishes this short reminiscence, the sages reappear behind us and offer their apologies to Midna directly for their part in the downfall of the Twilight. All 5 of the remaining sages stand solemnly with downcast expressions and lament their behavior and disastrous overestimation of their own abilities. As they bow their heads in regret, they beg the forgiveness of Midna, whom they dub the real Twilight Princess. Midna seems to shrink away from this proclamation and seems ashamed of the title. The shame and the reason she hid her true identity are both tied to the fact that she fled her people in their hour of need. She tells the story of how she came to be the imp that she now is, when Zant overthrew her and cursed her to take the form that we have come to know her as. After the curse took hold, she was exiled from her own palace and was only able to secure a portion of the fused shadow that she has worn since we met her. She goes on to tell us about when she found us after being captured by the shadow monster and transformed into a wolf while in Twilight. The Twilight had long believed that the hero would appear as a divine beast, so when she saw our transformation and our capture, she believed she could use us for her own ends and to regain her own power. At first, she cared nothing for the world of light, only for revenge against Zant and the restoration of her power. However, after our long journey together and witnessing the selfless acts of Zelda, Midna is convinced that in order to set everything right once more, she must help to save our world as well as her own. She hopes that by defeating Zant, the curse that keeps her trapped as an imp will be lifted, and then she can revive Zelda using the magic that saved her own life. With the stakes clear and the path set, we step into the light of the mirror and feel the sensation of teleportation wash over us as we are transported into the realm of Twilight at last. The realm of Twilight is both different than we expected and also familiar. The pervading ambiance of dusk and odd geometric shapes that float everywhere are what we expect from the time that we spent in Twilight-suffused areas of our own world. But there is far less substance to this realm than we would have thought. The mirror has put us on a huge floating platform of rock with the royal palace directly in view. But all around us is empty space. In the distance we can see a few floating islands of rock, but this place lacks the hustle and bustle and life of our own land. As we approach the imposing palace of black stone, Midna asks that we keep her secret from any Twilight we happen to see, as they are likely to be discouraged by their former ruler's appearance as a small imp. With Midna safely tucked away in our shadow, we set off towards the palace. In front of the palace walkway are a handful of Twilight that appear to be halfway transformed into shadow beasts. Midna is disgusted by what Zant's magic has done and is doing to her people, and asks that we help them if we can find a way. The path to the main palace is blocked by an impenetrable wall of thick shadows that fall into the abyss like a waterfall. So we instead make our way to one of the side wings of the palace to start our investigation. While the signs of life and society may be sparse, the Twilight Palace is far from sparse in its collection of various enemies, and it seems that Zant will be throwing everything at us as we explore his stolen fortress. The Twilight-infused version of basically every mob enemy stands in our way, from Dekubabas to Shadow Beasts and Shadow Rats, but we slay them all with the power of the Master Sword on our warpath to Zant. In the first wing of the palace, we find a glowing orb of pure white light, which is held in a stone hand. As we enter the room where this orb is held, a twilight fence descends, and a blurry illusion of Zant appears in the room out of nowhere. This magical apparition uses his sorcery to summon large portals that fill the room with enemies, and we have to chase it around the room to stop the summoning with swings of our sword. After quite a few hits, the apparition disappears, leaving us alone with the orb in the hand. We free it from the hand, and Minda informs us that it is called a soul, and that it is the source of the life-giving light that the Twilight need. It seems that Zant has trapped the soul and its pair within the palace as a part of his magic to turn the Twilight into the shadow monsters. So restoring both souls will go a long way towards restoring the Twilight realm to normal. As soon as we start moving towards the exit with the soul in hand, the stone comes alive and begins moving towards us, meaning to steal the orb back and keep it under lock and key. We have to use the soul to form escape ramps and stairs, and the soul also dispels Zant's dark magic crystals that litter the floor of some of the rooms. As we escape the wing of the palace with the soul in hand, as soon as we exit the palace door, the Twilight that was standing by the door is turned back into their normal form in the pure light of the soul, confirming the theory that restoring the orbs will help set things right. We quickly heal all the Twilight that we can reach with the first orb before heading to the other wing of the palace in search of the second. We have to use some convoluted floating platforms and combat new enemies that take the shape of a ginormous version of Zant's helmet. But we eventually find our way into the second soul room. We fight the magical apparition of Zant yet again, and yet make our escape with the second soul. Once we place the second orb in its proper place, both souls glow brightly, releasing their purifying energy into the whole of the realm. More than that, they release a stream of their light into the Master Sword, infusing the blade of Evil's Bane with their own unique light and empowering it against Twilight-infused enemies, and allowing us to dispel Zant's dark crystals with the swing of our sword. With this new power in our blade, we are able to cleave a path through the falling darkness and enter the Palace of Twilight at last. The Palace of the Usurper is filled with enemies, and much of the area has to be traversed with transparent floating platforms, but we set our sights on ascending to the very top where the throne room is. As we climb, we are continually accosted by the sentries that shoot giant balls of energy at us. Usually, when we fell a handful of these pesky buggers, they'll drop a key, so we always make sure to wipe them out any chance we get. Close to the top of the palace, we find ourselves on a grand balcony overlooking the large abyss of Twilight. A flock of Kargaroks try to stop us here, but we wipe them out with the infused Master Sword before taking a moment to look around. The fall of dark crystals that blocked the entrance originates here, and we decide to investigate behind it before moving on. Behind the falls, we find the big key, which will open up the key to the throne room. So we head into the final area and begin the final ascension to the top. Before we can reach the throne room, we are swarmed by dozens of shadow beasts, and even though we have regret of destroying them after seeing the harmless beings that they originated as, we have to carve our way through them with the empowered Master Sword, which makes short work of these foes. Finally, we enter the throne room and come face to face with the Usurper King at last. He sits upon the throne of the Twilight, the throne we now know to be rightfully Midna's, and is stolid and implacable even in the face of our success. Midna decides that some taunting is in order, and rubs it in Zant's face that the only reason we were able to get this far is because of the dark curse that he placed on us, which allowed us to freely transform into a wolf on a whim. This seems to irk Zant, and he rises from his throne to tell us of magic and the oppression of ages. As he retells us the story of the origin of the Twilight, he removes his helmet for the first time, revealing a young-looking face with a geometric tattoo running from his forehead to the tip of his nose and large orange eyes. Zant tells us of ancient anger and rage at the perceived oppression of his people by cruel gods who locked them away in this netherworld. He believes that the Twilight regressed here in the shadows until their anger, hatred, and even their ambition disappeared with time. He places the blame for this lack of ambition on the useless do-nothing royal family and their resignation to this half-existence. As he talks about the perceived wrongs and his own lust for power, which was thwarted by his own people, he begins to lose all semblance of the cool composure that he has projected since his first encounter with Zelda. He begins to flail about with ridiculous, exaggerated movements, and he teleports wildly around the room at random intervals, punctuating his story with nonsensical noises and exclamations of crazed emotions. Eventually, he tells the brief tale of how he met Ganon on the eve of his failed attempt to take power from the royal family, and how Ganon promised him the power he sought and would help him in his ambitions. From that moment on, Zant gained the magical prowess he now wields, which allowed him to curse Midna and seize control of the Twilight Realm. He rises back up from his insane posture, once again crowned with his reptilian helmet, and declares that the wish of his god is to merge shadow and light, and thus make darkness over all. With these words, Zant summons his magic and the fight begins. Zant doesn't attack us directly, not at first. Instead, he uses his power to seemingly teleport us back to the Forest Temple, into the arena where we defeated Diababa. We look around for our foe and see him floating above the poisoned water before he unleashes a volley of dark magic at us. We block most of it with our shield and dodge the rest, looking for a way to get close enough to do some damage. Zant starts teleporting around the arena, always floating above the water, so we get the idea to use the item we received in the temple against him. When the Gale Boomerang strikes, the Usurper King is stunned enough to fall into the water, and he skips along it onto the shore where we can get in some damage with the empowered Master Sword. We get in a few hits before he teleports once again, but the next time we get him on the shore, he doesn't teleport back to the air above the water. Instead, he uses his magic again to bring us to another arena from our past. We teleport from one past fight scene to another, from the lava pits of Death Mountain to the watery grave of Lakebed Temple, from the Forest Temple to the icy bedroom of Snow Peak Ruins. We fight Zant with every weapon we've amassed along our journey, and each new arena brings a new batch of tricks for the False King to use against us. But none of them can overcome the skills and tools that we have gained along the way, and at last we find ourselves just outside the Twilight Prism surrounding Hyrule Castle. On a stone courtyard overlooked by the castle, Zant finally faces us without his tricks, as he produces two blades of wicked design and starts erratically swinging and slashing towards us. Zant fights like a crazed lunatic, but his erratic patterns and intermittent teleportation does make him hard to hit and hard to predict. After we land a few blows with the Master Sword, Zant throws a tantrum and starts spinning like a top at insane speeds. We can only block this bizarre attack and wait for him to tire out, but when he does, we move in and make him pay for it. At the end of the day, Zant's erratic lunacy is no match for the skills and abilities we have learned along our quest. Our spectral master, the shade of the long-gone hero, passed on to us all the tools we need to bring this False King down. With a final blow, Zant is defeated, and we find ourselves back in the throne room of the Twilight Palace. Zant sits on the throne, panting in exertion and defeat. The three fused shadows, which he stole from Midna in Lanayru's spring, now return to their rightful master, and Midna absorbs them into herself. As the rightful ruler of the Twilight, only Midna can use their power, and while their return doesn't break the curse that keeps her as an imp, it does offer something arguably better. As Zant sits on the throne, raging at his defeat, Midna reveals the final truth of Zant's life to him. No one would call him king because all could see the lust for power that lived in his eyes, and it was the same lust for power that condemned the Twilight to this realm in their failed bid to usurp the sacred realm. As Zant taunts Midna, he reveals that the curse on her cannot be broken by killing him, as its power originates from Ganon. He reveals that Ganon has already descended into Hyrule and has been reborn, and that as long as Ganon lives, he will resurrect Zant without end. Midna's rage finally boils over, and she uses the magic of the fused shadow to eviscerate Zant, disintegrating his body into specks of dust that float away into nothingness. As shocked as we are by this display of savage power, Midna seems even more so. She exclaims that only took a fraction of the power that the fused shadows imparted, and that leaves us both wondering what else this new power could be used for. With Zant dead and the Twilight free of his influence, we have only Ganon left to deal with. Midna is sure that the Fiend is in Hyrule Castle, which means that we must get there at once and free it from his grasp. Hopefully by doing so, we can resurrect Zelda and save Hyrule from the fate that the Twilight have suffered under Ganon's influence. With the power of the fused shadows, the skills that we have gained from our journey, and the purifying magic of the Master Sword all combined, we just might have what we need to defeat the evil king at last. Yeet.
Well done, as always, Matt. That brings us to part 2, which is our takes, where we talk about this section of the game and how it made us feel. Alrighty. So, Cody, I'm going to pass it over to you first, just to give us a little bit of general context about maybe one of the overarching criticisms that this section of game has. I feel like it's kind of infamous for a few different reasons, and if you feel like enumerating at least some of those, then that could kick us off.
Could this be about Zant?
Oh, let's maybe not jump straight into Zant.
Are you turning the pod car around already?
Look, Zant is at the very end of this section. Okay,
I know, okay, all right.
Let's talk a little bit about the mirror, the journey through, the sages talk with Midna. There are other things.
You want to go in order. You need structure and stability.
I do need structure and stability, Lyndon. This is something you know about me.
Okay, well then how about this? Cody, how do you feel about this section of the game, starting with the mirror and ending with Zant?
It's got a lot of story in it.
Yeah, it's another one of those sections that really it loads you up with some backstory, right? And it's done interestingly, I think, from the sages, apologizing to Midna. We get official confirmation of Midna being the Twilight Princess and ruler of the Twilight, which has been heavily hinted at throughout the game. So I don't think this is super surprising to anyone at this point.
A very cutscene heavy section of game here. We've got a few actually very interesting cutscenes. Which is fun, and I really appreciate that. That's something that Twilight Princess has been doing pretty good up until this point. And so, it's nice to see that continued here. It is fun to see the Mirror of Twilight reassembled and to see the way that the mirror chamber is set up to accommodate it. The whole process of the mirror projecting onto the stone and forming the portal.
It's set up pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, I totally interrupted Cody's thoughts.
Oh, Cody, we interrupted your thought.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, I think it is worth noting, as I said, it's a lot of story. It's sort of, because Twilight Princess is a weirdly paced game. And this is something that, because I was listening to the first few episodes of this season, and you were all loving it because it was all the stuff that you love most about, Skyward Sword. And I was thinking, oh wow, this really is going to click with them, because this is like in Skyward Sword with the the guy who needs protein shakes and all of his friends up at the sky, and you get to know them and you got stories around them and all that kind of thing, and that's really that's a fun thing, and that's a fun thing that the kind of fun thing that you both seem to really enjoy. But then they sort of become irrelevant, and then there's not much story at all, and then it's bam, here is all the backstory. And I think it's good it's good to learn more about Midna and get all of these cool scenes and that sort of thing. But yeah, it is, I don't know, the pacing is the thing that sort of gives people different memories of Twilight Princess depending on which parts of it they remember playing.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And to your point, I do think a lot of this backstory is really nice, and especially if you come to Zelda a lot for lore, as Matt and I have said many times, we really do appreciate that element of the series. Then yeah, you're right. There's a lot to like in this game, but also in this section of the game specifically. It's nice because especially as we go further into this game and meaningful character moments for people not named Link, Midna, and Zant become like pretty light on the ground. The conclusion that I kind of come to in those moments is, well, as long as we're still doing right by the really important ones, as long as Midna is still getting her due, and as long as we're still working on paying off that story and making some emotional resonance there with that character, then we're still doing okay. Like, not perfect, mind you, like still criticisms to be had. Like, I don't think that this, as we've mentioned the past few weeks, the trajectory of the story post Lakebed Temple, post Sacred Grove is not above reproach by any stretch of the imagination. But like, as long as Midna is still doing okay, then we're still doing okay. And I think that we're still firmly in that camp here. It is nice getting overt confirmation of Midna as being the title character of this game. I know it can be a little confusing, right? Because earlier in the game, Midna jokingly refers to Zelda as the Twilight Princess. And, so here we definitely get kind of that about face, which is just like, oh, hey, we didn't actually reveal the whole thing that early on. Like, turns out the Twilight Princess is somebody that you've been hanging with the entire time. And it's really nice. We get a lot of dialogue in this first cutscene, especially that kind of goes back to some of the things that we had been talking about back around Arbiter's Grounds, right? Where we were talking about the Twily as a race and this whole mechanism of the Mirror of Twilight and the sages like sending criminals just willy-nilly into this other world that was like habitated by people.
Right.
Sending them to the Australia of the Legend of Zelda universe, as Max so eloquently put it. One of Max's only Australia facts, but definitely a good one. But anyway, like I do think that it continues to build a good narrative around the central the central emotional pillar of this game, and that's important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's also key to me that it's one thing we talked about with Sam, where we talked about like the sages being kind of inept, right? And or was that with Max, where we talked about, because it was with Max. So we talked about how they like just sent Ganondorf in there and they're like, yeah, we kind of screwed up and we're really sorry. We overestimated our abilities and our power and totally screwed you over, in particular Midna. And yeah, we apologize. Like kind of taking some ownership there, I think was a good moment for them.
Yeah. Cody, I mean, how do you feel about this portrayal of the sages? Does this do anything for you? I mean, we talked about the plot moment itself, back during the Snow Peak episode, but we didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about, like, we talked about the sages generally and their portrayal throughout the series, but like, what is this version of the sages doing for you, if anything?
I'm not particularly a sages sicko. As you might call them. That's a term I just made up just then, but
okay, I liked it.
But because there are sages sickos out there who really want to learn about the imprisoning war and all this kind of stuff. For me, sages are most relevant when they're people I guess. So it's cool to have just random sages, but I don't know, not as cool as if it was Saria or something.
Right. Yeah. That's totally fair. I don't know. Do you think that this is an instance of the Zelda series kind of like flirting with more heavy themes and narrative beats than it necessarily executes on? Like, it's kind of teasing you with the outline of bigger like moral quandaries and stuff without explicitly getting into them.
I mean, I think Twilight Princess is the darkest game in vibes, but it's not necessarily the darkest game narratively. Like I think The Wind Waker is ironically probably a darker storyline than this.
Yeah, because it kind of
genocide.
Yeah.
The water dragon being bad at her job. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's like genocide, loss of just everything's gone. Is it worth trying to bring it back? Basically, dealing with concepts of grief and moving on and all this kind of thing, and that's the cutesy Wind Waker game. You know, in Twilight Princess, it's not undark, but it's, you know, it's not necessarily dealing with themes that are edgier than, you know, we've seen in the past or anything like that, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, you know what the mirror chamber reminds me of when it's all spun up like this?
It kind of reminds me of the Gate of Time in Skyward Sword.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
It's got big sealed temple vibes going into the past.
For sure.
Which I thought was kind of cool. I actually think this looks a little cooler than that, to be honest. Like the effect of the mirror and it kind of like going into another dimension.
And it's a lot bigger, and like it's cool that the mirror shines a bright white light onto a purely black obsidian stone. Like there's some cool imagery going on there that I think works very well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just so nice because the mirror chamber itself was such a cool location when we saw it for the first time. And it's just nice getting to spend more time there and to be spending time there at this climactic moment in the game. It would have been a little wasted if we had never gotten back there again. So.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm glad we get a good set piece here.
Yeah. So we go through the Mirror of Twilight. We emerge in the actual Twilight realm on the footsteps of the Palace of Twilight. And Matt, I'd like to get your thoughts on this area, at least just from like a vibes and aesthetic standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. The Palace of Twilight and surrounding area is really cool. I kind of wish, and I thought this when I first stepped through, I was like, it's really neat. It's weird that it's just like a floating castle in the middle of nowhere and there's just an abyss around. So where do all the Twilight actually live? And like, why is this not kind of a mirrored version of Hyrule? Like, that's kind of what it was spun to us in the various cutscenes and discussions. Well, but it doesn't look like that at all.
Let's be real. Still looks more habitable for a civilization than the City in the Sky looked last week for the Fuka.
Absolutely, for sure. So it's odd to me that there's just abyss around, right? Like, it would have made a little bit more sense, in my opinion, had there been vistas to see, like fields or towns or something. Like, sure, even if you couldn't go there.
Oh, like kind of an under the sea in Wind Waker sort of situation.
Yeah, exactly. But instead, it's just Twilight Abyss. That's just nothingness all around. So it was a little confusing from that perspective, because all you get is like half a dozen Twilight that are kind of in the midpoint of transformation into shadow beasts.
Yeah.
And then a whole bunch of Twilight Kargaroks just hanging around. And you're like, so is your population mainly Twilight Kargaroks? That's kind of what I'm getting.
Yeah. It's an unfortunate situation where the scale as it's being presented by Midna to us in dialogue isn't really executed in terms of like visuals or setting. And, you know, obviously that's just down to budget and time and ability to execute on something like that.
For sure.
But
I think it is out of all of the Dark Worlds, out of all of the arguably 4 maybe times that they've pulled this same trick with a different Dark World. Typically, it's an entire world that's like a mirror version of the real world in some way. Whether it's a link to the past or a link between worlds, or I'm even including Tears of the Kingdom here with the depths.
Sure.
There's often just like, you've basically just doubled your play space or whatever. But in Twilight Princess, the Twilight Realm is more, it's more theoretical than it is in any other Zelda game. You're really getting, just rule of cool, spooky floating platforms and things, rather than anything, that's like a mirror world or anything.
Anything substantial, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. I think that it's a disappointment because the actual art direction here is pretty strong. I think one of the reasons this is working for me better as a space just visually than City in the Sky is because, so like last week I said, City in the Sky to me felt almost like it was coming from a completely different game. Like it felt out of step with Twilight Princess from a visual standpoint. This is definitely a very different space than anywhere else that we've visited anytime in the game up until now. But the thing is, we have been exposed to elements of Twilight visual design before this, like via the Shadow Beasts and via Zant and the Shadow Portals. And like we've seen things that have kind of helped build the visual pillars of this civilization. And so when we get to the Palace of Twilight, it's really cool because it feels like it's just kind of the natural end of that. You know, it's kind of saying like, hey, we've established that this is the look and feel of the Twilight, and here it is on a grander scale. And I think that that's a lot of fun because I really like the look and feel of the Twilight, and I really like the architecture and the feeling of the Palace of Twilight. You know, sense of scale aside, I just think like as a location to spend some dungeon time in, it feels really great. And I think it's one of the cooler artistic leaps that the Zelda series has really ever taken, moving away from just pure fantasy and into something that's a little bit more, I don't know, like a little bit more abstracted, a little bit more brutalist, right? Like, you know, very like sharp edges and black structures with neon lighting and stuff.
Yeah, and I think
got kind of a fantasy Tron thing going.
I think that's where Twilight Princess actually gets a little underrated. Is, you know, the people say, oh, the graphics, it's all, you know, they're trying to be realistic and that sort of thing, but it's not. That's not quite true. It's compared to the Wind Waker, the art style is more, you know, proportionate in terms of, you know, bodies and stuff. But like they are doing like fantasy here, not it's dark fantasy, not just like the world, you know, realism or anything like that. And they have some really cool and stylish stuff in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And I do want to say real quick, too, because I know that we're going to kind of veer into it a little bit, but I do want to save any discussion of like enemies and mechanics and stuff for the dungeon map. It's going to be a little weird, right? Because we're kind of like, it's sort of all a dungeon together. But just for part 2, I'd like to talk about just mostly the plot, you know,
sure,
and I guess the visual trappings and things. So obviously, like I think that putzing around the Palace of Twilight is a good time. I am just a sucker for an empowered Master Sword. When the Master Sword becomes glowy and more powerful anytime, that's really fun to me. It's even more fun here because we get an increase in damage to Twilight foes, which is great.
Yeah, I also really liked the Master Sword kind of crossing dimensional barriers, right? Like its power is not restricted to Hyrule, but it becomes more powerful here in the Twilight, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because a blade that is specifically created to combat darkness and evil, and it being empowered here. I really liked Midna's dialogue about the guardian deities, whatever they may be, of the Twilight realm being so on your side that they're like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and take that blade that is basically designed to destroy everything that exists in this realm, and we're just going to make it more powerful for you, and yeah, have fun, go ham. And like I thought that was really cool. I also really liked the souls, the sons that were in the Twilight realm, and kind of the lore about how, you know, even in Twilight, there has to be light for life to survive, and it's just different. It's not. It's kind of moving us away from what was at the beginning of the game, which is Twilight is bad and it causes darkness, and it's like, no, that version of Twilight, which was corrupted by Zant and Ganondorf, is bad, but the Twilight itself is not.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to the opening dialogue of the game, right? Where Russell is talking to us about that moment when our world almost interacts with theirs, and it's a beautiful thing, you know? It's, you know, melancholy for sure, but not evil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Inherently. And so I think it's a fun callback to that moment. I like ascending through the Palace of Twilight, and it's very fun, especially once we get up to the fight with Zant. Like later we find out that this little balcony area was a very significant space, right? The one that's like midway up the tower on your way to go find Zant, as the spot where Zant first encountered his god, right?
Yeah.
But do we have any more general observations about the Twilight Realm and the Palace of Twilight, specifically from a plot standpoint, before we actually start talking about Zant and everything that we learned here? Because I feel like we're about there.
Yeah, I think I just want to note briefly that saving the Twilight from their half Shadow Beast transformation was really cool. And like, it wasn't really talked about much, and there wasn't much of to do about it, but being able to remove their dark Shadow Beast helmets and turn them back into their kind of dopey, docile.
I like the noise they make.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, you guys seem cool. I kind of wish you could talk to him, even if it was just like garbage dialogue characters, like the Uka at the beginning. It's just like a bunch of weird symbols,
or that, or that like Midna would say something to them, or
I get Midna not talking to them because she has that little bit where she's like, "Can I still just hide in your shadow so they don't see me as this powerless imp because I used to be their ruler, so I don't want them to see me like this." Like, I get that, but I would have liked some interaction, I guess, for them to just be like, "Thank you for saving me from that," or like anything. I think that they had a cool moment to give us some emotional ties to the people that we're saving, because we're not just saving Hyrule anymore. We're saving the Twilight Realm, and now we have the emotional connection there via Midna. But it would have been fun to get some emotional connection to the people of Twilight.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about Zant. And just to get all cards on the table, this is where we get our cutscene showing the first time that Zant ever met Ganondorf. We see the circumstances of Zant wanting to ascend to leadership of the Twilight, not being allowed to do so, being frustrated by his lack of ability to gain power in that way. And it's at this point that the flamey head, the Andros head of Ganondorf, comes to him.
It's very interesting characterization. Yeah.
And, and basically promises his power to Zant. Zant makes a Faustian bargain with Ganondorf here. And it's from this point on that we get a very different portrayal of Zant than we've really had at any other point in the game. So, Cody, I'm going to send it over to you. I would love to hear your thoughts on Zant as a character, especially with the extra context that we get about him in this section of the game.
So the general reaction to this, I feel like in the community, there is a sort of disappointment that Zant is not, because Zant in the early game is really cool and interesting. And when he just becomes, oh, by the way, the real big bad is Ganondorf, I think that was disappointing to a lot of people. Just because it's, I don't know, Ganondorf doesn't really, I mean, he's there, he's a cameo, but like, he doesn't really have motivation. Like, Zant's the one with the interesting motivations and things, whereas Ganondorf is just sort of evil.
Yeah,
you know?
and we see that most clearly here, right? It's not just like early in the game we saw Zant being cool and evil and imposing and all of those things, but here we get the context, right? Zant felt slighted, and he has an axe to grind with Midna because he felt like he should have been the ruler of the Twilight, and he was not allowed to take on that role. And so I think you're right, Cody. I think that there is extra context here and extra depth to Zant's character that gets kind of glossed over a little bit in this section. Like we touch on it just in time for him to go away for the rest of the game.
Right. It's like it's like, well, you've defeated the enemy. Here's his tragic backstory. Well, anyway, let's get on with the plot. But, I think Zant, like the theoretical, like if before this point, you just never imagine a version of Twilight Princess where you played it like halfway through, you met Zant and then you had a corrupted game or whatever. You never got to know the ending and you had to figure out your own ending based on, Zant and all this kind of thing. I think and I think most people, if they were asked to write an arc for Xant's story and Twilight Princess's story and stuff, wouldn't go, oh yeah, he sort of dies but isn't really that relevant, is not really the direction that I think anyone would go, if you know what I mean.
Well, and the other thing to me is his story doesn't make a lot of sense to me unless you're interpreting the Twilight as some kind of pseudo-democratic or oligarchical, where he could become the ruler even though Midna is the princess. So like, is he even then trying to usurp power? And if he is, then like he's always been bad. And the most odd thing to me is the complete 180 that he does from being an imposing, menacing, strong, like slow-moving, calculated, powerful character to this Pennywise-esque character that flops around. And
Pennywise was a good connection. That's a very good, very apt line to draw.
Yeah, he goes full like psycho weird.
He goes
manic.
like knockoff Joker. And I guess the comparisons between all these is a clown. He turns from a menacing figure into a clown.
Right. And it was so abrupt and so there was nothing at all about his characterization or anything we've heard about him so far that would indicate that he's mentally unbalanced in this way or prone to this type of manic episode. But he starts basically throwing a tantrum and then just like flails around the room and teleports erratically. And I'm just sitting there like, this isn't scary. This isn't just weird. And you have taken a character who was really a phenomenal bad guy and turned him into kind of a joke.
He becomes very impotent in this cutscene and in this final battle. And it's really a shame because the thing is, even if everything else happened the exact same way, right? We defeat Xant here, and now we've got to go fight Ganondorf, the real big bad of the game. Still would have been disappointing in its own way, but I don't think that it was necessary to alter Xant's character in this way at the last minute. Like, everything could have still happened in the exact same way that it did. I think that would have been even a bit more effective feeling, right?
Sure.
If Xant had maintained the level of poise and confidence that he had, and you were able to overcome him, then to me, that's a powerful moment for Link. And here it robs us of that feeling of power.
Yeah, and it's weird because Girahim has a similar arc to Xant, right? Where he's usurped by Demise instead of Ganondorf, but basically the same thing. But Girahim, having been a very expressive and odd villain throughout the entire game, his final fight, he doesn't go full Pennywise, manic, erratic. He like buffs up, turns into this cool, massive, black, imposing, slow-moving, methodical machine of war. And it feels like that's what Xant should have been. It feels like Girahim and Xant switched places.
Exactly. Well, like, because with Xant, what we have is it turns out that the confidence and the poise was a facade, and you were really, goofy and impotent underneath all of that the whole time. And with Girahim, it's the opposite. The panache and the flourish and the oddity, it's an act, right? That's the facade, and underneath of that, he's a tool of destruction.
Right. And it's really disappointing to see Xant go this direction. And I don't want to keep ringing the bell as much as we already have, but I really wish that they had gone an entirely different direction with this fight, because you're right, Lyndon, it robs Xant of his last shred of importance and his last shred of true meaning to the story and his true meaning as a villain. Like, it's just gone. It doesn't matter. He doesn't matter anymore.
You don't hear in the Zelda community people talking about Xant outside of the context of this game. Like,
right.
He's a character that could be something and had the potential to be something, but by the end of his story arc, it's like, oh, we don't really want to talk about him anymore.
Yeah.
And and you don't really talk about Twilight Princess Ganondorf either in the community, aside from like, oh, cool fights or that kind of thing aside, like in terms of the character of Ganondorf.
Well, and aside from the timeline discussions of everything,
aside from timeline discussions and all of that, aside from lore stuff, it's Wind Waker Ganondorf is the pinnacle of Ganondorfs to me, because that's a Ganondorf who has a purpose that's not just like, I like to do evil, I like to kick the puppies because I'm evil. That Ganondorf has got like serious, he is evil, he is out of his mind, but like he's got motivations and all this kind of things, and there's even points where you could sympathize with him. But like, I feel like the villain stuff here sort of, I don't know, it was sort of, you got rid of the interesting guy and you put in like, oh, it's him again, just because we need a bad guy. But like, yeah, there's just not, there's not the discussion points in terms of character and that sort of stuff that there could have been.
This hilarious. This is a quick aside because you just brought up something that, like, it's so funny because for a very long time when I have been trying to analyze the characters and motivations and the realism or lack thereof of the motivations of evil villain characters in fiction, a lot of times in my head, I'm always framing it in terms of like, yeah, but would they kick puppies just to do it? Like, like Voldemort, I know his motivations. Would he kick a puppy? I don't know. Like, would Palpatine kick a puppy? I don't know. I like to think that there are villains out there who are villainous for perfectly good reasons within their own internal logic that would choose not to kick the puppy. I don't know where Ganondorf is on that list, but
these villains feel very arch in such a generalized way that they kind of lose characterization, I guess, is kind of where I'm trying to wrap that up succinctly, I guess, if that makes any sense.
No, yeah, it does. Yeah. It totally does. So was that the point you wanted to make? I know I interrupted you. Okay, cool. I'm glad that my interruption still brought us to the point that you wanted to make.
It's like we have a rapport that builds off of each other instead of just cutting each other off all the time.
Hey, we should start a podcast together.
Huh. That's an idea. Anyway.
And so it's weird because I think a lot of this too is down to the fact that Zant looks immediately less imposing once he takes the helmet off. Mm-hmm. Like I really wish he'd just been wearing the helmet the whole time.
Yeah, his helmet's so cool, man. Like his character design with the helmet and the armor and everything is truly one of the coolest villain designs in all of Zelda, I think. Like it's really up there.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say I was disappointed coming out of this section of game because in my mind, this was the week where Ganondorf really started to have a presence. Obviously I knew we didn't meet him in person this week, but I was thinking this was the week where we started really seeing a lot of him via flashbacks and like seeing more of the character, like the Twilight Princess character of Ganondorf. And outside of Flamey Head Ganondorf for 2 seconds, we really don't. And so I think that more than anything else has got me aligned with your thoughts, Cody, when you were saying that, he just kind of shows up as a cameo at the end of the game. And that's a shame because I think that if you want to start making that feel like the big fight that's worth having at the end of everything, then you need to start establishing Ganondorf here a little bit more. Like more than just the cutscene we got with the sages, more than just Flamey Head Ganondorf. We need to see more of him, and we need to get clued into more of the plan, like his whole goal and what he wants, and what his goal was in recruiting Zant.
And his speech to Zant doesn't. Sorry, Cody, I'll let you go in a second. But just building off your point, Lennon, his speech to Zant doesn't clue us into his character motivation at all, because his whole thing to Zant was, "I like you. I'm going to give you my power, and then whatever you want, I will want also. Enjoy." Like, what? That's not something Ganon ever does. Ganon uses people to his own ends. He doesn't allow people to use his power for their ends. That's not a thing that happens. So like it makes no sense for what we know about Ganondorf as a character in general across the series.
Yeah, I just think like, yeah, I agree. It's not that you can't have Ganon as a cameo at the end, but like there should be some more build up in terms of like reason, like, you know, if you came out of this thinking, Ganondorf has tricked Zant, you know, then that's a character moment. Like if it was like, you can have this power, but actually my plan is to, you know, as soon as you're strong, I'm gonna drain all your energy or whatever. You know, you could be like, oh yes, there's a villainous puppet master at work or that sort of thing. But yeah, it was just more sort of like, this is my minion.
And it's unfortunate because there's no overlap there, right? I think that this whole idea of Zant not being nearly as powerful as we thought him to be, and us kind of easily defeating him, and Ganondorf knowing that was going to be the case, but just using Zant as a pawn, I think that works better if there's more overlap between the realization of that. Like, there has to be a moment where Ganondorf is abandoning Zant, and then we're able to defeat Zant. But instead, what's happening is we get to Zant and we beat him without that moment of betrayal, and Ganondorf still being, you know, off stage somewhere. And
unknown where at this point.
Yeah. And it's just not as effective as it could have been.
And Zant's thing about, you can kill me, but my God will resurrect me as many times as you can kill me. Like, what? I don't think that's really Ganondorf's shtick ever that I can think of. He doesn't really.
I mean, maybe he gets resurrected on the Blood Moon.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. I mean, I liked, for the purposes of this whole situation being a little cooler, I'm going to choose to believe that is possible.
No, I mean, it's possible, sure, but like it's not the lack of possibility that's weird to me. It's the lack of precedent. Like, Ganondorf isn't one to reuse the same minions over and over again. If someone fails him, he generally discards them and gets a new one.
Right.
Like Palpatine.
It would be interesting if he was using him in a way that was like, you know, one-sided. And it would be interesting if they were actually friends, or what, like if Ganondorf actually formed an emotional connection. Those would be two approaches that would both be interesting character moments in different ways. But to just be minion C, I guess, is a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. So after we defeat Zant, we come to learn that Ganondorf is taking up residence in Hyrule Castle, and that he is ostensibly the cause of the barrier that has been erected outside of the castle. And now we know we're in the end game now, Tony. We've got to go back to Hyrule and we have to defeat Ganondorf. Now that Midna has the power of the fused shadow, which she took back from Zant, right? Yes. So that is kind of a fun moment. Like, as much as all of this was slightly disappointing to me, I do think the final moment where Midna harnesses an ounce of the power of the ancient Twilight and is able to defeat Zant with that, I do think that is, again, a fun character moment for Midna. Like, that gives Midna a potency that is deserved for her character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know that it was really explained super well, mostly because there's not a noticeable physical change in Midna. When she gets the fused shadow, she just kind of absorbs it. And
I've been confused about this. Like, it looks like she's been wearing the fused shadow for the entire game.
Right. Like, her helmet doesn't change. Her coloration doesn't change. Her hair doesn't change until she uses the magic. So, like, I saw her absorb the fused shadow, and then she was just like, kind of looking at her arm, and her arm looked no different. And then she's like, oh, I just used some crazy power that I didn't know I could do, and this is awesome. And I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, we got the fused shadow back, I guess. That's neat. So a lack of visual change, I think, was an interesting choice. And I don't think it was a good one necessarily, but
yeah. I mean, To be honest, I had kind of completely forgotten that the fused shadow was even a going concern at this point in the game, right? Like after we abandoned it after Lakebed Temple, like after we switched gears and started focusing more on the Mirror of Twilight, I had almost completely forgotten about it. And I'm a little confused now as to why it was even helpful to Zant, because his possession of it doesn't seem to have moved the needle in terms of his ability to defeat us or Midna.
Well, I don't think he could use it because he wasn't the rightful ruler of the Twilight. So like I don't.
So it's an Elder Wand situation.
I think so. Again, not very well explained at all. I think he just took it from Midna so that Midna couldn't use it, and like that was it.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I'm getting.
Okay. That makes a certain amount of sense. I'm interested to see if Midna having the Fused Shadow is useful for something more than just her being able to defeat Zant going into the back half of this game, or not the back half, into the finale of this game,
right?
Because I would like for that to be the case.
Yeah, it would be kind of disappointing if we go and confront Ganondorf, and I don't remember the finale of this game at all. So what we're saying in this episode is truly. Like, we honestly don't know. It would be really interesting if Midna, like, we go to confront Ganondorf and Midna tries to use the power of the Fused Shadow and Ganondorf just kind of goes, flop, and, like, brushes it aside.
Yeah.
And then goes, yeah, your powers aren't going to work on me. But then, at the same time, then what was the point?
You have no power here, Gandalf the Grey.
Yeah. But... That would also then beg the question of what was the end all point. I don't know. Maybe it will surprise us.
Yeah. In terms of the use of the Fused Shadow, is it not the case that the bosses you fought were transformed by the Fused Shadow?
Yes. So
the first three,
that was true. So and we, I think, are led to believe that those bosses having that power are one of the reasons that those areas of Hyrule were falling victim to calamities of various kinds, right?
Yes.
So it was useful to eliminate that situation. In fairness, like that's a good point, Cody. That is a layer to this whole thing. But I do think that Midna, even in the early game, was talking about the Fused Shadow in terms of something that she needed to get in order for this whole situation to kind of be set right, and in order for her to defeat Zant, which in fairness turned out to be the case. It just also turns out that doesn't really matter that much.
Right. Like I feel like we probably could have killed Zant even without the Fused Shadow. Like we have the empowered Master Sword now, so you know.
Well, I don't know about that. It seems like we set Midna up to deliver that final stroke.
Okay.
So,
sure.
Okay. We'll call it that for now until we have a good reason not to. Does anybody else have anything they want to say generally about this section of the game before we get into our discussion about mechanics and experiences with the dungeon itself? Nope. Cool. Well, in that case, let's go ahead and get into part 3, which is the dungeon map, which is our section where we talk about this week's dungeon, from mechanics to music and more. This week's dungeon is, of course, the Palace of Twilight, which I will say I was excited to get to because my recollection was that this game sort of has 2 final dungeons, right? In my mind, it was like, okay, we've got basically 2 Ganon's Towers. We've got one in the Twilight Realm, and then we've got one that we're going to do next week in Hyrule.
Right.
Which sounded neat, right?
In theory, yes.
In theory. Matt, how did you feel about the Palace of Twilight as a dungeon experience?
Yeah, I liked it. I think it's good. I think it's a good dungeon. It's definitely not a Ganon's Tower, right? It's definitely not a final dungeon, but it is a good dungeon. The mechanics of defeating the floating Zant heads to get keys was kind of cool. I think it showcases some of Zant's power leading up into that final fight, where we get to see kind of how far his magic has come, maybe some of the defenses he's set up in the palace now that he's taken it over. Like I talked about, seeing the Twilight kind of half transformed, so seeing his magic even working in real time. The clouds of darkness crystals that he has, which, you know, suffuse all light, including the light of the Twilight Realm. And a lot of the moving platform puzzles, I think, were really good. I think there's a lot of them, but most of them I think work pretty well. Less Wolf Link section than
you would think.
Yeah, especially I'm not quite sure why we can enter the Twilight Realm in human form now. That I wasn't clear on that.
Yeah,
but whatever. I'm not gonna
Well, I think
piecemeal it to death,
it's back down to that shard of Ganon's magic that Midna's just keeping in her pocket, right? Mm-hmm. I think we're just like we're free to be either wolf or human Link in the light world. We are similarly free to be wolf or human Link in the Twilight Realm.
Yeah, so that's good. That's good enough for me. Yeah, general blush thoughts. I think this dungeon's good. It's very combat heavy. I think it's probably the most combat heavy dungeon we've had in the whole game. There's a lot of fighting.
I don't know about that, but it is pretty. Yeah, it's pretty dense. Cody, here's my question for you: do you think that we should be framing this discussion in terms of this week's dungeon and next week's dungeon, Twilight Palace and Hyrule Castle being two halves of the end game dungeon experience, or do you think that they should be judged separately on their own merits?
I don't know. I mean, I'd probably judge them separately. It's not. I don't know. I mean, you can consider it all part of the ending in a way. Like, it's not. It's a different structure than other Zelda games, in that usually in the final regular dungeon, you're not like defeating the enemy that, defeating the main boss up until now, or that kind of thing. But I don't know. I think final dungeons are a sort of different thing in Zelda. Like, they're usually not very good, to be honest. Like, usually it's some like marathon of past bosses or this sort of thing that I'm not, that aren't usually the highlight of the thing,
Ocarina of Time's Ganon's Castle comes to mind here.
Yeah. But, there's a lot of good endings in Zelda in terms of final fights and stuff, but I don't usually rate the actual final dungeons that high.
Yeah, and I guess the reason that I'm even thinking about this at all is because if we're not considering it the end game experience together, Twilight Palace plus Hyrule Castle, then we're having to talk about the Twilight Palace on its own, and is it strong as a dungeon on its own, especially within the context of how strong dungeons have been in this game overall. Because if it's not meant to be an end game experience, like part of the finale of the game, then we have to judge it against, Lakebed Temple and Snow Peak Ruins and the Temple of Time and Arbiter's Grounds and all those other things. And if that's the conversation that we're having, I think that as fun as this dungeon can be at times, it just doesn't hold up. And I wish that it had, just because its setting, I feel like, deserves that.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of whether it's a dungeon, I mean, well, it is a dungeon, but it's not. They clearly meant it to be something more like entering the lair of Zant, rather than, going through an ancient temple to get a new weapon halfway through and all that kind of thing. Because you don't get an item or anything in this dungeon, do you?
No, you don't. Unless you count the Master Sword being upgraded halfway through it, but I don't think I count that.
Yeah, I wouldn't count that either.
I mean, if it's fun, judge that on its own merits, I think. Like, the fact that it's not in the same format as some of the other dungeons is just something to consider. But I don't know. They are mixing it up a little near the end.
And I do appreciate that. And the thing is, I feel like you're correct, Matt. From a mechanics standpoint, there are things to like here. I think that the whole relay race with the souls in both of the two main wings before you get into the center building. That's fun. This whole mechanic of the Twilight version of the Wallmaster, always kind of like creeping and about ready to pick up the soul and take it off the glowing platforms and whatnot. Like that's cool. And that adds a certain urgency to all of the puzzle solving that you have to do. And that's great because that frantic quality to having to solve puzzles and do things within a certain period of time can be very effective, and it's got this sort of Jaws like quality to it.
Yeah,
like
especially with the music as it picks up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like you're trying to raise platforms and trying to make it from one place to another, and the whole time this is happening, you have this like Twilight Jaws music that's getting louder and louder and louder, and you're like, okay, the hand is getting close to the soul, and I've got to do something about that. And I do think that that's all very effective, and it is also kind of nice because what that means is that we've got another example of. We came through a certain set of rooms to get to a thing, and on the way back through that same set of rooms, the layout of them is changed and our perspective of them is different because we now have access to a different mechanic that is altering that space. And so it's nice because that's basically giving us, twice the dungeon within those areas.
Yeah, I really like when you get such a drastically different layout of spaces that you've previously traversed with the mechanic like that. I think the raising of the platforms was really effective. Again, we're going to go back to the claw shots have an indeterminate amount of range based on use case.
I never know when they're going to work.
No, it's
so frustrating. Weird. And like, am I going crazy?
No, you're not.
Or is the distance determined by
what you're trying to hit?
By the puzzle?
Yeah, I think it is because it's drastically different from room to room. It's really weird.
Like I was trying to hit claw shot targets in some of these rooms that I was like, honestly, like Argarok in Sky Temple was twice as far away from me
easily
when I was like hitting his tail and stuff.
For sure.
It makes no sense.
Yeah. So, this is another thing. One thing that we have hit on a lot is how clunky the controls are in this game. I swear, man, I was getting so frustrated, specifically in the wing of the room with the multiple platforms that are moving side to side. Underneath is the pool of shadow crystals that turn you into a wolf, and you're having to like time your jumps while fighting a Zant head sentry. Like I fell off of those platforms, like no joke, 4 or 5 times just because I was trying to move up a little bit or trying to shield bash the Zant beam and just fell right off. And like the movement controls just
I have
so
fallen
bad.
off of so many things in this game, and I fell off a lot more things in this week's section of game. And I don't think there's any way around it at this point. Like Twilight Princess is a clunky feeling game, and it continues rearing its ugly head every single time I log on and play.
It's really frustrating.
That's an interest because these are the two. Look, it was on the Wii, but functionally it was a GameCube game that was ported to the Wii. So the two GameCube Zelda games are the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. And it's just really interesting looking at the comparisons of like the Wind Waker is such a optimized game in terms of just the feel of the movement and the combat and all of that kind of thing. Like it's a really smooth, but the actual dungeons aren't very good a lot of the time. Whereas Twilight Princess is like, here's some great dungeons, but wonky movement. So
Matt, now that we've kind of gotten to the end of Twilight Princess, and now that you've played the Wind Waker, I spent a lot of time talking about this.
Yeah,
previous to us playing both those games, what Cody's talking about right now. Do you agree with me? Like, does Wind Waker
absolutely
that just feels
100%. Like and we talked about this a lot on the Max episodes. We've talked about it basically every single episode this season. This game does not feel good, and that's weird for a Zelda game in general. Zelda games usually feel very good, very polished, very smooth. This game does not, and under any circumstances. There's not a single movement control in this game that feels any sort of good, except maybe aiming the bow. Like I think you could probably say aiming the bow is pretty good, but outside of that, it's all clunky and weird feeling. And Max clued us in as to probably why that is, but it's just
it doesn't make it better.
No, it doesn't make it better. Like sure, you can know the reason, but the reason doesn't mitigate the issue. So
sure.
Yeah,
exactly. Let's see. So just talking about, I forgot to do the rundown on the dungeon at the top. So,
go ahead and do that.
I'll go ahead and
cut
do
it
that
in
here. But I mean, I don't even think I'm going to cut it in. I mean,
okay.
It's whatever. Like the dungeon is basically separated into 3 wings, right? We've got a left wing and a right wing. And then once you've solved a certain amount of puzzles in both of those, you unlock the central tower that leads you up to your boss fight with Zant.
But by carrying the souls to the center platform and empowering the Master Sword with their light.
Yeah, exactly. Main mechanics are mostly just not falling into the shadow crystals because they turn you into Wolf Link. You can immediately turn back, but once the Master Sword becomes empowered, and also when you're carrying a soul, you can dispel those clouds, and that's one of the main mechanics of the dungeon. Enemies include all of the Twilight enemies that we fought up until this point. We've got Shadow Beasts, we've got Shadow Kargaroks, we've got the trash
goblin rat things.
Trash goblin fucking assholes from the sewer.
Those things did more damage to me than any other enemy in this entire dungeon.
Yeah. It's way more fun fighting them as Human Link.
Yes, for sure.
But not by much. And and that's basically all there is to it. You're progressing through the dungeon basically by using the souls to access new moving platforms, and doing so for enough time brings you up to the boss fight, which is with Zant. So, yeah. I don't know. Do we have anything else we want to say about the general mechanics before we talk about the boss fight?
I think the last thing I'll say about mechanics is I actually really liked how you could easily tell when you needed a key and how to get it, because the keys all come from defeating Zant sentry heads. And so I think that was kind of an effective reuse of a classic Zelda theme, which is kill all the enemies in a room and you get a key.
This is a weird enemy, though.
It is very odd.
It's just Zant's head.
Yeah, who shoots little purple balls at you every once in a while. And
I mean, it's cool. Again,
works
Zant's
for me.
Helmet looks really cool.
Yeah.
So it's fine, I guess.
Yeah,
but
it works for me. I think it's fun. I think my favorite part of the dungeon was the segment, the balcony segment, where it's just a whole flock of Kargaroks, like a million Zant heads. You got the big darkness waterfall that you have to, the boss keys behind it. And then moving into the large central tower and ascending up it with the moving platforms, and you have to guess the right sequence of moving platforms to get to the right spot.
Yeah.
I kind of liked that. I think it was a cool trial and error that wasn't super punishing. Like, it didn't hurt you if you got the wrong one.
Yeah.
But it was I think it was good. There are a ton of Shadow Beast fights. There are a ton of enemies. And each of the wings, you have to fight like a apparition of Zant who summons a bunch of enemies, and you have to time it to hit him before he summons them. And
here's my question, Matt.
Yeah.
Why couldn't we have a Twilight version of a Dark Nut in this dungeon?
Dude, that would have been so cool. Like, the Dark Nut was the coolest enemy we've fought in the entire game, and we've only fought one of them, and I just want more. I want more Dark Nuts. Those guys were awesome.
Be careful what you wish for. I'm going to talk about that here in just a little bit.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I do think that this dungeon was, for as much combat as it had, I think it does kind of come down to a situation of infinite trash mobs.
Definitely. Especially when the empowered Master Sword one hits everything.
Right. So give me a Twilight Knight, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't even have to kill them. We can defeat them, and then it turns out that they're royal guards of the Twilight family or whatever. We freed them.
Oh, that would have been so cool.
Right? But let me sword fight some people. Let me do something actually fun here.
I have all 7 of the combat moves. I want to use at least one of them. Instead of just constantly spamming spin attack, let me use some of these cool combat moves I've gotten throughout the entire game.
I will say, so the balcony area with the darkness waterfall, there was a thing that was going on in there that I originally thought was very annoying, where I thought that I had killed all the enemies, and the enemy is in a room sound was still playing. And in the Twilight realm, that it's not my favorite noise.
No, it's like
yeah, and
it's like a bunch of garbled nonsense.
And I wanted it to go away, especially because I actually kind of like the soundtrack of the Twilight Realm when you're not in the presence of enemies. It sounds pretty cool
for sure.
And I was so frustrated by that. I was like, where are these other enemies? I want this noise to go away. And it turns out that you asking that question is actually fairly essential to you not having to backtrack a super long way to go get the boss key.
Which I actually had to do.
You had to do? Okay, cool. So I was at my wit's end. And I was just like, there's got to be someone else still here. I was thinking at the time, maybe this is like part of a heart piece puzzle or something. And so, you know, I roll a spin attack on the darkness waterfall, and there's a few darkness Twilight cargo rocks that are back there.
Sure.
And I was like, okay, cool. The music is gone. And also, this seems like a place that I'm supposed to be. And that leads you to the boss key. So I did think that was...
It leads you to the boss key if you look up and see the hookshot things, which is what I did not do the first time that I was in there.
Well, if you're assuming that this space is useful for something other than just killing those 3 cargo rocks, then
I didn't think that because
well, that's a you issue.
It is. I thought that I was supposed to kill every enemy, so I went and I exterminated every cargo rock, every Zant sentry head. I killed them all, and then nothing happened, and I was like, oh. Okay, well, I guess that was it, and maybe I don't know. Maybe I missed something. I also didn't have the compass, so that was also partially part of the issue.
So anyway, a very sneakily hidden boss key, and I'm sorry that you had to do some backtracking to go find it, Matt.
It actually wasn't terrible.
Hopefully, nothing as bad as what Mike had to do in the Temple of Time.
No, nothing will ever be that bad.
Okay, cool. Anyway, so we get the boss key. That leads us up to the boss fight with Zant, and it's funny to me because this boss fight could have been so much more than it actually was. But what it actually turns into mechanically is what Cody, you were talking about a few minutes ago, which is just like, hey, you're in a final-ish dungeon. And so now seems like a really good time for us to reuse boss arenas from all the other dungeons that you've played in the game so far. And I hate that. Like, I don't think it was necessary. The only thing that it really does for us is it gives us an opportunity to bust some of those old items out of our inventory. But you could have given us a way to do that without having to send us back to the Diababa arena or without having to send us back to the Morpheal arena. It just wasn't my favorite. And on top of that, you know, it is nice that we have varying mechanics that we have to do in order to make it all the way through this boss fight. That's fun, but it doesn't help that Zant is becoming like goofier and goofier the entire way through the thing, as we talked about earlier. So, yeah, it should have been a much more terrifying moment and a much more impressive boss fight than I think it actually was.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I don't hate revisiting past boss fights. I think it can be used well, like the boss rush in Skyward Sword to get the Hylian shield from the Thunder Dragon. I kind of like that, but
that's optional.
Exactly. That's what I was getting at. Thank you. I was getting there. Yes. Okay. I like it when it's optional. I don't like it when it's just like, let's reuse these things. And you know, when you said like Zant just gets more and more ridiculous and goofy, man, when we revisit the monkey mini boss just so that we can smack Zant on the ass with a sword, I was over it, man.
Notably, one of your favorite parts of this entire game.
I was so over it. I was like, this is dumb. This is lazy. Are they going for comic relief here? If they are, why? And if they are, it's not working.
There's nothing Matt likes more in a Zelda game than smacking a boss in the ass with a sword.
Yeah.
It is known.
It's my favorite thing in the world. That was so dumb. I think the ending of the Zant fight where you're fighting, I think you're inside the crystal that is encasing Hyrule Castle. like you somehow get teleported there or to a facsimile of there.
Yeah.
And he's like pulls out his 2 swords. Like, again, had a huge opportunity here to turn Zant back into some kind of badass. Instead, he just starts flailing around like an idiot and spinning around like a top hat.
Yeah.
And or like a top. And you're just like, oh God. It did give me a chance to use my magic armor, which I guess was cool. I like that magic armor a lot. It looks neat. And I did get hit a lot. So it drained me of almost all 500 of my rupees. So it was nice to have, I guess. I actually got hit a lot in this dungeon. I used all of my potions and fairies, all 4.
Well, it's because it's hard to engage the mobs of Twilight enemies in a tactical way, you know?
And you get hit so often simultaneously to you hitting them. It's like a Destiny trading situation. Which in hero mode really sucks because it takes a lot of hearts away and you don't have an easy way to get those back. So anyway, that was a little bit of a digression. But yeah, the boss fight could have been cool, just wasn't. A really sad ending for a cool character.
Max, whoa,
yeah, you're gonna have to cut that out.
How
you've been talking to Max too much.
America, I'm mad.
Look, it's not. You didn't even call him Josh, which Cody is his brother, so that would have been at least acceptable.
He's not even related to Max. At least he and Josh are blood siblings,
separated at birth by a storm
on the high seas. Oh my God!
Cody got Moses all the way to Australia.
Quote from me. Hold on, let me look up Hyrule interviews.
Yeah, let's pull up Hyrule interviews. What do we have for this? This just shows you how much we've been talking to Max lately.
Seriously.
Oh, God. Cody, our guest of the evening, notably not Max. Man, you know, of all the people that I know from America who I think would be likely to hop in anywhere and say, yee howdy, how's it going, guys? I don't know that Max is top of that list.
I can only do one American accent.
And it's yee howdy?
And it's yee howdy.
Which works really well for our podcast.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
It's fine. Cody, I know it's been a very long time since you played this boss fight, but do you have any memories of it? Have any thoughts about it? I mean, Matt and I are kind of rendering a lot of judgment on this whole experience, and I'm curious if you're aligned.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I found the whole Zant, ending stuff pretty, meh. I mean, I don't know. It would have been fun if maybe it had made you use, like, instead of a boss rush kind of thing like they often have, what if it was like a dungeon item sort of rush? In terms of, like, what if Zant was spinning and you were spinning on your spinner and you were playing Beyblades?
Man, this actually would have been a very good opportunity to bring back the spinner, which has not had opportunities to do anything really since we got
at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
yeah.
What was that? I was sorry, Cody. Go ahead. I lost my train of thought literally as soon as I started it. So sorry. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, I was, because that's one of the main critiques of Twilight Princess is they stuck to the formula so cleanly that they created a bunch of cool dungeon items that they didn't really have good ideas on how to use outside of the dungeon. So if there was a sort of, like, coming into the end, like, here's bringing back, Zant does things that imitate different bosses and you have to use the, use the different items or that kind of thing. That could have been a cool penultimate boss fight sort of situation, I think, just in terms of brainstorming of ways that I would have liked to see it.
Yeah, and I also think it's an interesting conglomeration of bosses that are reused. They don't reuse Star-Lord at all, which kind of sucks because that was the most fun boss fight.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, of all of the greatest hits you could have chosen for this, we picked whatever monkey fight, monkey totem pole fight.
Ook.
Yeah. over Star-Lord.
Yeah.
Or even over like Fyrus. I mean, we got the mini boss fight arena from Goron Mines instead of the actual boss fight arena.
Yeah.
Which in fairness, actually, I think was a better fight.
It was definitely a better fight. But it didn't use any of the mechanics from that fight. Like it was just use your iron boots to not get knocked off and then go bum rush Zant. Like you didn't have to do any wrestling or anything, which was the fun part of that fight.
Yeah. I think the only two encounters of this whole thing that were worth a damn were one, as much as Zant was being a goofy moron for the Hyrule Castle fight at the very, very end.
It was definitely the best one.
Yeah, thematically it was cool. But also when he becomes giant in the Blazetta fight arena.
And then gets really, really small.
Yeah. And you have to hit his feet with the ball and chain, right? And he kind of hops around and then he becomes tiny. Yeah, you know.
That was fine.
I don't know why he became tiny, but...
Yeah, why didn't he just become normal sized? No, he just had to get super tiny.
Because we needed one extra layer of goofy on top of this whole thing.
If you were going to make it goofy, you can bring back, like, let's do sumo wrestling with Zant. Let's go, let's go fishing to feed a fish to Zant. Like, let's bring back all of the stuff, you know.
Yeah, we fly Zant up dried Zora's River.
Oh God, that sounds horrible, dude. Getting a clear out the town faster than Zant. Like, even better. Do a duel, like a High Noon, Clint Eastwood style duel.
we're back on the bridge of Eldon.
Yeah,
jousting with Zant. Yeah,
like, I could do that too.
It's all the set pieces in the game.
Zant
just
grabs
with Zant.
Colin and runs off. You know,
all better than what we got, honestly. So
it was all there.
It was there for the taking, and they didn't use any of it. Instead, we got Zant does monkey butt. Which,
Zant does monkey butt. If our episodes had titles other
that
than
would be it. That would be
Princess Chapter 10, then it would be
ding.
Yeah, Zant does monkey butt. It would have been great. All right. Do we have anything else that we want to say about this dungeon before we move on in this episode?
Midna's hair magic has always been an interesting thing that if you're an avid listener of this podcast, you would think I would hate because it's kind of weird. But it's also kind of cool. I don't know why, but I kind of liked it, especially in this cutscene where it goes full. What's the cat in the marbles?
Goose.
Yeah, but what's the creature called that eats everything?
Flurkin.
Yeah, it goes full Flurkin and just like tentacles out, stabs him and just like rips him apart. Or if you're an Elder Scrolls fan, it's very much like Hermaeus Mora whenever he kills anybody. It's just like lots of tentacles, stab, rip. Like it was pretty visceral.
I'm not an Elder Scrolls fan,
I know you're not.
And that meant nothing to me.
I know, but I knew the Flurkin thing would, so that's why I used both.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Go see the Marvels. Apparently, it's pretty good.
Yeah, there you go.
And it needs some help.
I mean, I don't care about the MCU at all anymore, so I'm probably not going to do that. Anyway, digression aside, I think Midna gets a good moment here at the end, and I do appreciate that. All the Midna moments at this point in the game are just the highlights, honestly. Like I think that's where we're at. This is now Midna highlight reel.
Do you wish that we had transitioned to Midna's ultimate form in this section?
No, I think Midna's farewell is too emotionally powerful to rob her of that, even here.
Okay, fair enough. I respect that. I feel the same way, but I do think that a person who is inclined to debate could mount a counter argument.
Absolutely. Someone could very easily devil's advocate that.
So, yeah.
Normally, I'm the one to do that, but I don't want to because I don't feel that way.
Okay, fair enough. I would never want to push you into something that you don't want to do, Matt. All right, let's go ahead and get into part 4, which is Bloopy Trails, where we talk about interesting things that diverted our attention this week. Cody, I'm going to let you go first, and because this is your first appearance on this season of the pod, you get to have your pick of basically any Bloopy Trail that you want in this game.
All right, well, let's see. So a shout out to a bad mechanic in Twilight Princess at the start when you have to fish for the cat. I just wanted to say that was I was playing it on the Wii and I think I just couldn't figure out how to fish. and I got stuck there for a while. So that's my bad shout out. My good shout out, let's go with roll goal.
Interesting, because we have not discussed that at all on this season of Pod so far, and I discovered it for the first time this week.
What is roll goal?
Oh, Matt, we'll get there. Oh, actually, we're here right now.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, sorry. Cody, explain roll goal to Matt.
All right, let's see. So you have to go in. It's in the Azores River in the fishing hut or fishing hole hut, and there's a little game board thing, and it's basically like a roll a ball through to the goal without it dropping kind of thing.
I'm trying to imagine where this would be in the fishing hole.
It's really interesting because when you go into the fishing hut, I actually spent some time there this week because I finally went to...
Did you get the bottle?
Yes, I got the bottle.
Okay, good.
Yeah, okay. I finally went over there. I have not visited the fishing hole at all in this game so far because fishing minigames appeal to me
not at all.
0%.
Yeah, negative percentage.
Yeah, not into it even a bit, except for a little bit in Link's Awakening... but it doesn't necessarily count. Anyway,
because that's how you get Mambo.
Well, no, in Link's Awakening, you can get the Mario fish. The cheap and the the squid.
Sorry,
the other one. I don't know. Whatever.
Digression.
Anyway,
sorry.
So you go to the fishing hut, and once you're in the fishing hut, you can actually focus in on different pieces of table dressing, like scenery that are in there. And Hina, I forget her name.
Henna sounds good.
Okay. The lady who runs the fishing hut will give you like history of all these things. And so there's like a photo wall of her and all of her family, which turns out she's related to all of the different merchants that you've like met in Hyrule, basically. Lantern Guy, Canoe Girl, they're all her siblings.
Sure.
And so anyway, on the opposite wall, there's a little this game that Cody's talking about with the roll ball, and if you focus in on it, you can actually play the game. And I think what's the deal, Cody? It takes 5 rupees, and you win 10 if you complete it.
Yeah, and there's like 8 different stages.
Okay, and so I've only done the first one, but it's actually a pretty fun little mini game. In part because when I got into it, I was thinking for some reason, like I had Breath of the Wild gyro controls in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
It is gyro controls on the Wii, but if you're playing it on the Wii U, I assume you'd be able to. Well, I think you can tilt on the Wii U gamepad, but I think you can also just use the control stick.
Yeah, so I'm using the Steam Deck without gyro controls enabled. Yeah. So yeah, so this was actually fairly easy for me. But yeah, you just kind of maneuver this little metal ball through a little obstacle course, and it was neat. Like it was a fun little mini game that I wasn't expecting to find. The game wasn't really pointing you to it in any major way, and it's just one more little mini game in a game full of those. Like I think the Twilight Princess has like 10 or 15 different mini games at this point. It's got a ton.
Yeah, except it doesn't have a shooting gallery.
Yeah, well, what you gonna do?
Complain about it.
A notable oversight. But anyway, it was fun enough to where I might go back this week and just play another course or two just to see how hard they get. I don't know. Fair enough. Could be a good time. It's worth going and visiting that hut anyway, just to get like some of the personal stories that Henna tells you about her family and how she came to, be into fishing and stuff. I know it doesn't sound that exciting, but it's a fun little character moment. It's actually kind of a Majora's Mask-y sort of level of character development, just without the existential dread. So.
But existential dread is half the fun, Lyndon.
Yeah, so anyway. But that's a good shout, Cody. I've played Twilight Princess 3 times before this playthrough, and this was one of like 3 or 4 mini games that I didn't even know existed in this game before playing it for the mod.
I guess that's part of the fun of discovering it, is it's just like so random and out of nowhere that's just like, oh, you just checked out this thing. And there's a whole new minigame in there that the game doesn't really point you to at all.
Yeah, sure.
That's really cool. Yeah, I may go check that one out.
Under no circumstances will I go back to this place to fish.
But you'll go play rollball, huh?
Yes, I will. Yeah. So Cody, I'm sorry, I actually kind of encroached on your bloopy trail a little bit here, but
that's all right. We can share a bloopy trail.
Okay, that's fun. I'll go ahead and dovetail straight into mine because I actually did several this week. So this whole fishing hole experience was one of them. I collected one or two more golden bugs. I went back and did the claw shot version of the circus tent minigame in Hyrule Castletown.
Yep.
Which was actually pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think as a minigame that's constructed around one specific item and you just trying to like optimize your points from like A to B and getting all these little glowing stars in as little time as possible worked really well. I like this minigame. I could have actually even been fine with a harder, like a third level of it that was a little bit harder than this one.
Sure.
I would have probably gone back and done it.
Yeah.
So
that is probably the best minigame in the game, in my opinion. I also did that one. I liked it a lot. It was really the only one I did. The only other thing I did is I've been feeding rupees to the guy who was like, will you donate to Peace and Love in Hyrule? And I honestly thought he was just he's the guy wearing the with the Gandalf beard and the green robes.
I haven't met this person.
Yeah, he's like immediately in the entrance to one of the side streets, like right when you come in the gate. He's got bright green robes on, and he's got a big long Gandalf beard. And if you talk to him, he says, "Will you donate to the cause of peace and love in Hyrule?" And you can donate 30 or 50 rupees at a time. Apparently, if you donate I think it's like 3,000 rupees to this guy, which is an absurd amount, you get a piece of heart. And like, I just have so many rupees at all times, and I'm not using them for anything anymore besides magic armor. Now that I've finished the expansion of Malomart, I stop by every once in a while and just feed him some rupees. So okay. I got the piece of heart this week, which was fun. Yeah, after you feed him however many, he's like, love descends upon you, and like a piece of heart just comes out of the sky, and like you get it.
Hey, you know what? Feel free to repost this on any social platform that you like. I support peace and love in Hyrule.
I mean, I don't think anyone can disagree with that. What else? That's really all that I did. I didn't do a whole lot of bloopy trailing today, or this week, I guess. But yeah.
So the other big one that I did was I visited the Cave of Ordeals.
Ooh,
what is that, and where is it? I want to go there.
Talking about before.
It is, yes.
Where is it, and I want to go to it?
It's in the Gerudo Desert. It's in a hole underneath of where you moved the Elden Bridge from.
Mm-hmm.
In Wind Waker on Outset Island, where you go 50 floors deep and it's an enemy gauntlet.
Yeah.
So this game has an almost identical version of it, just with Twilight Princess enemies. And basically, so it's 50 floors deep, and every 10 floors, you get visited by the Great Fairy, and the Great Fairy will release fairies into the springs of Hyrule.
Nice.
So I got down to floor 30 something, I think. I got fairies released into Ordon, Faron, and Elden Springs. And at about that point, I got my ass completely kicked by a pair of dark nuts that you have to fight at the same time.
Nice.
Yes. And let me tell you, fighting two dark nuts is a completely different beast than fighting a single dark nut. Like, it was absolute chaos. It was incredibly difficult, and in some ways a little unfairly difficult, because there's a situation going on where you can't really be tactical about that situation at all. One of the other dark nuts is going to be moving in on you to attack you, no matter what, like depending on which one you're trying to target. It's pure chaos, and it was fun enough in and of itself. I'm not going to go back and try to clear it all the way down to 50 floors. At floor number 50, you get the Great Fairy's Tears, which is the potion that completely heals you and also gives you the
attack boost.
Yes. And every single time you go back after that, you can get a free bottle of it as long as you don't have some of it already.
Got it.
So it's a decent reward in and of itself. The problem is that doing a cave, I forget what this was called in Wind Waker, but the Cave of Ordeals in Twilight Princess is inherently a lot less fun than the Cave of Ordeals in Wind Waker, just because combat in Twilight Princess and movement in Twilight Princess is less fun than it is in Wind Waker. Like in Wind Waker, it was a really good time to clear mobs of increasingly difficult enemies just because the movement was fluid and your combat abilities felt more fluid, and it all just clicked a lot better for me. In Twilight Princess, it falls victim to the same level of clunk that everything else has. We have all these cool combat abilities, you know, like I have all 7 Wolf-Link, or not Wolf-Link, I have all 7 Hero Shade abilities at this point. And I used them in all the opportunities that I had, but like it's just, it doesn't all come together in a super cohesive package as much as I would like for it to.
And if you thought that was janky, welcome to the Cave of Shadows, a version of it exclusive to Twilight Princess HD in which you can only play as Wolf-Link.
Seriously? There is one of those?
Oh, wow. Where's that?
So you access it by using the Wolf-Link amiibo on the collection screen.
Interesting. What does it get you?
It's
probably
the final
stamp.
reward is, I think, it's not a stamp. It's like a wallet that has 9999 rupee capacity, I think.
Okay. Well, that doesn't sound worth it.
No, for sure not. I don't know. It's just, this was something that I had enough fun with to do at one time and not enough fun to go back and spend, I don't know, several hours just trying to clear the whole thing. So
sure.
And that's a shame. Like, I think that these experiences in Zelda games can be very fun. I love Wind Waker's version of this. I love the Trial of the Sword in Breath of the Wild, you know? And I think that in concept, this one is just as solid as those. It's just hamstrung by the mechanics of this game.
Sure.
Yeah.
I definitely want to check that one out, though, just to have some fun with it myself.
Sure. Yeah.
We did say last week we were going to talk a little bit about the culmination of the Hero Shade side quest. And so you said you completed it this week, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So I think that as a general thought, the 7 combat maneuvers, getting them and learning them and utilizing them is one of the high points of the side questiness of this game. I think that it is really well done. It utilizes the gimmick well, the Wolf-Link gimmick. It utilizes the combat learning mechanic well, better than a lot of Zelda games where combat mechanics can be learned, but they're not generally used a whole lot. And Max mentioned that, you know, maybe you use it more in hero mode than you do in normal mode, but obviously we're not playing it in normal mode, so just going to talk about what I'm experiencing. So I think it's really good. Coming to the final one and wrapping it up and getting the 7th one where the Hero Shade can rest because he's passed on his final lesson. The dialogue was a little bit different than I remembered, Lyndon, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but he doesn't talk super specifically about anything, and he even says like, because we always assume that this is the Hero's Shade of Ocarina of Time Link.
I still believe that, and I'll give you my reasons why, but sure, continue with your point.
I also still believe it, but the dialogue is just a little bit different. Like I remember, for some reason, my thought of this final dialogue was his regret about not being able to be the hero that he otherwise would have been, and that he like lived in a time where they didn't need the hero or something. But it wasn't that. It was he was like, I had my time as a hero, but I wasn't able to pass on my skills, and that's my only regret. And now I have passed them on to you, go my child, and be the hero. I mean, I'm just super paraphrasing and it's probably super wrong, but it was not as specific to a regret about not being able to be a hero. It was just a regret about not being able to pass on what his hero's skills were. So that was different than what I remembered, which kind of caught me off guard. I was curious what you think, felt, etc.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what I think about that.
Yes.
In a different section of this podcast.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's it for Bloopy Trails, right?
Yes.
Cool. So speaking of that different section of this podcast, let's get into part 5, which is Z-targeting, where we lock onto fascinating characters or enemies that we happened across.
Lyndon, I'm going to let you go first since you have a thought on the tip of your tongue that you want to get out.
Well, look, here's the thing. I have 3 separate Z-targeting characters that
you can only have one.
Right. Okay. So if the hero shade was going to be yours this week, then
I don't think it was.
Okay, cool. Well, then I'll take the hero shade.
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm picking the hero shade now that we can actually talk about this because one, I think that it's so incredibly cool. The concept of the hero of time being this ghostly form that's been instructing us throughout this entire game. And the reason that I still think that is the case is because one, I think the dialogue supports it. Like I had never gotten the impression that you had, which is that, this was a character who was existing in a time where the hero wasn't needed or whatever. The dialogue to me is speaking to the hero of time, especially knowing that the struggles that version of Link went through are basically unknown to the people of Hyrule in this timeline, right? Like nobody who still exists in the child timeline is going to know what he went through as adult Link in the adult timeline, right?
Right.
They don't know what he did in Termina. So in some ways, he's completely anonymous, right?
Right.
He's done all these incredible things. And in some ways, like talking metatextually, he's in some ways the most famous version of Link, right?
For sure.
But nobody knows about it. And so the hero shade in this form as a Stalfos, like taking the form of a Stalfos, is passing on those lessons to us, maybe or maybe not his direct descendant, hard to tell. But just because he didn't get that recognition and he didn't get the ability to pass those skills on in his own lifetime. I think that's a really cool story. And honestly, I don't know that I would have picked the hero shade as my Z targeting this week if we didn't have the extra context from Hyrule Historia basically confirming that that's what this character is, Sure. And again, thank you Hyrule Historia for just going and deciding things, I guess.
I mean, but needs to be done sometimes.
Sure. But I think that this character was probably much more nebulous before that clarification was made, right? Before Hyrule Historia goes in and is just like, hey, this is the hero of time, basically. Mm-hmm. This character could have just been, not a previous Link, could have just been a swordsman who lived in Hyrule previous to this time, whatever.
Sure.
But having some specificity around the lore of what the hero shade is. I think that's it's so cool. And it's one of those instances where Twilight Princess as a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time in both timeline and in intention.
Sure.
It's one of those areas where it can really kind of capitalize on that connection. And I love it for that. So hero shade gets my pick this week. Cody, I know that you've read Hyrule Historia as well. I've got the correct read on this, don't I? Or am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Hyrule Historia doesn't say that much. It does confirm that it's the hero of time, but, in terms of motivations and feelings and all that, people can, come up with their own explanations.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's one of the beautiful things that remains about filling in those gaps, as we've talked a lot about.
Yeah, for sure. And anyway, it's nice to actually be able to talk about this now because we've been kind of skirting around the hero shade for the entire season because we didn't want to necessarily spoil anyone on it. But
right.
It's Link. It's been Link the whole time.
Yay. Hey, Link.
And honestly, maybe one of the coolest looking versions of Link that we've
Seriously,
ever
man.
had.
Like we talked about when we first met him, his armor is so cool.
He looks awesome.
It looks so cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to see another version of Link in just full armor instead of just his green tunic, like as an optional outfit, maybe. That's why I always wear the soldier's armor.
Like in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, that's why I always wear the soldier's armor in Breath of the Wild. It's like my favorite thing.
Okay,
It's so fun.
All right. Matt, who would be your Z targeting pick for this week?
I'm just gonna go ahead and pick Zant, even though this episode doesn't make him deserve it at all. I think up to this point, Zant has just been a really, really good character until this week, and I want to honor basically in memoriam of Zant, posthumously Zant. Posthumously meaning before we meet him in this section of game.
Exactly. Yeah.
In my opinion, Zant died after he resurrected
previous
Stalhorn.
to his character death.
Yeah, exactly. So previous to his the murder of his character, Zant was just a great bad guy, so menacing, so powerful, so unique, motivations that made sense and were interesting. And I just think Zant was really great, and he just got absolutely murdered this week, and it was really sad to see, but I want to honor him before his murder.
I'll put it this way. If I ever do a poster for Twilight Princess,
It'll be Zant.
Zant is going to be a major part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's appropriate. Like, I agree with you. Like, Zant was one of my 3 characters that were fighting for this position this week.
Sure.
And it's not because of anything that happened that was awesome this week. But just because Zant has been a very strong villain up until this point. And Cody, I think you're absolutely right. Like, there's a reason that people don't talk about Zant a lot outside of the context of this one game.
And it's because of this week's section of game.
And I hate that. Like, I think that's actually slightly unfair, because when you frame it in terms of like time spent on screen, Zant does just as many cool things, maybe even cooler, as other side Zelda big bads like Vati or Majora's Mask or, whatever. Like
Girahim.
Yeah, sure. Like I think that Zant actually establishes himself as a very cool character for a lot of this game. And it's just the way it all resolves that sort of makes it all fizzle, which is a shame, because I really do enjoy Zant as a character. So yeah, good pick. Cody, once again, man, you've got your pick of just about anybody in this entire game for Z targeting.
So I'm going to go with a species, and that species is cats.
Felines.
So yeah, shout out to Link the cat, to Gangle the cat, to Louise the cat, and all of the other cats. Sometimes in groups of 20 or so that we may find through this adventure. This is just the most cat-heavy Zelda game, I think.
I think it deserves recognition for that, if nothing else.
Which is interesting because you play as a wolf, so you would think it'd be kind of dog heavy, but it's very cat heavy, which is fun.
But they can coexist, and they do.
Yeah,
so
they do.
It's great. Good call, Cody. So I mentioned that my Z targeting this week was down to one of 3 characters, and mentioned 2 of them. Matt, are you curious who the third was?
Is it Ganondorf because of Andros' head?
No.
Okay, then tell me.
God, it's the freaking Great Fairy in this game.
Oh, see, I haven't met her. So yeah.
Okay, well, go play the Cave of Ordeals this week, Matt, because if you thought that the Great Fairy was a horny-looking character in any other game, dear God in heaven, wow.
Okay.
Choices were made.
Oh boy,
it's a lot.
Okay.
I mean, like, literally, we are leaving very little to the imagination here. And
that's funny.
The Great Fairy was my 3rd runner-up, just because. Wow, that was a decision.
Okay.
So yeah, feel free to Google that.
I am Googling it right now, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, she's basically wearing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, we've got like the flowing locks of hair
that are covering up them boobies.
Yeah, and that's it. So
wow.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, that's
honestly a little shocked. Like far more explicit than the Great Fairy has ever looked before.
Man, what?
So
who signed off on that?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Anyway.
All right.
Not enough to beat out the hero Shade, who has a lot of other things going for him.
For sure.
Yeah. Worth mentioning, if nothing else. All right. That brings us to part 6, which is our final thoughts, in which we wrap up this section of the game in as succinct a way as we can think to do. Matt, this one's up to you.
As almost always, except for that one time.
I've done it twice.
Anytime that I'm not on, you do it.
Which I think has only been twice.
And then you did it the one time this season when I was like, I've never heard you do it.
So 3 times?
3 times. You've done it 3 times out of 100 and almost 50. So this section of game really is kind of abbreviated in anything outside of dungeon. We get a lot of good lore and backstory for our character of Midna, who is finally revealed to be the titular character. We get to see some more of Zant and Ganondorf's interactions, as brief as it may be. We get to finally explore the realm of the Twilight at least a little bit. We get a fun enough dungeon that may be lacking in overall complexity, but still is enjoyable enough, leading into a boss fight that really is just underwhelming and does some serious character assassination on one of our most favorite villains of the series so far, turning him from a malevolent and menacing character into a laughable clown, which is really unfortunate. But we move on from our dearly departed Zant and set our sights on Ganondorf for the finale of the game coming up next week.
Well done, as always, Matt. Most weeks, this would bring us to the end of the Sacred Realms rundown. However,
this is a Cody Davies episode.
The wonder from down under, Cody Davies, is joining us for this week, and that means that the Sacred Realms rundown is completely up to his mercy. Cody, do your worst.
All right, well, so let's start this week with Part 8, Australia Facts, the favorite segment. So this time it's about Australian accents. So this is about something called the intrusive R.
Wait, you mean there's more than one?
What's that? More than one Australian accent? There is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But in this case, this is across Australian accents, also British accents. But this is the idea that when I say the word 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't give it an R like pirates do or Americans. I don't say far like an American.
That's the way I always say 4.
But if I say 4, that's different from if I say 4 o'clock. And there's an extra R in there. But that is not because that's not just because of the R. It also appears in, for example, Ocarina of Time. So
right, you got an extra R at the end of Ocarina.
Yeah, and that's because in Australian accents and in sort of British accents, there's sort of an aversion to having the vowel sounds right next to each other. So it's like really awkward to say Ocarina of Time while you're doing it fast. Ocarina of Time, I either have to like merge the vowel so it becomes Ocarina of, or I have to say Ocarina of so that there's an R in the middle that makes them distinct words. And so, yeah, that's something you might notice if, grandma and grandpa, or, various other things where there's 2 vowel sounds right next to each other. There's an R in the transition. So,
it's hysterical because framing this in more of a Zelda context, back when Tears of the Kingdom came out, there was a fun moment on Twitter that I witnessed, Matt, in which what's the name of the pelican dude that he's the news guy in Tears of the Kingdom?
Damn it, I don't remember. Cody, do you remember? I don't.
Pen?
I think it's
Pen. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you meet Pen and you go on a variety of quests all over the course of your time in Tears of the Kingdom, and you're basically these side quests are done with the intention of filling out the newspaper that Pen works for. And anyway, every time Pen leaves a certain area, he says "so long," which is fun because it's a play on so long, but he's a bird because he soars.
Yeah,
right? So it's soar long. And anyway, somebody quote tweeted that at Alana Pierce, notable Australian video game personality, right? And said, Alana Pierce, every time she plays Tears of the Kingdom, is soar long. She said, "How dare you?"
That's funny.
Anyway, so that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, that is one situation in which Americans also can do an intrusive R, because instead of saying "saw it," a lot of Americans say "saw it."
Okay.
Yeah, like I saw it instead of I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard it. And they, instead of wash, they say "warsh."
Warsh.
Yeah.
Not all of us, man. That's a point of contention.
Yeah, that annoys me.
But it's a regional accent, but it's the same sort of thing where the letter R just makes its way in to things. So, but yeah, that was my Australia fact. So yeah, and there are different. I have a different Australian accent to a lot of other people. Here's a bonus Australia fact. The South Australian accent is considered different than other variants because we're much more likely than the rest of the country to say, for example, dance instead of dance.
Okay.
Well,
Cody, I don't think we've ever asked you this before. From what state of Australia do you hail?
Yeah, so it's South Australia.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Is that literally the state?
Yeah, that is the state.
He told us all of this before.
I mean,
he listed
it was a long time ago. It's been.
If you remember a previous Australia facts, we have Western Australia, South Australia, the Northern Territory. Like a few of the states and territories are quite literal of like, this is the western half of Australia. Western Australia.
For some reason, Victoria and New South Wales are the only ones I remember. I don't know why.
And Perth.
That's a city.
I remember that one.
It is a city in Western Australia. But
okay.
Yes, Victoria and New South Wales are the two biggest states because that's where Sydney and Melbourne are, which are the two biggest cities. So, but yeah, there's different accents between cities, and then there's a city and country sort of divide. Well, similar to how you have it in America, like the Crocodile Dundee accent is sort of the equivalent of the Southern accent in America, you know.
Gotcha. That makes a certain amount of sense, actually.
So that was Australia facts, and then we'll go to part 11, America facts. America uses a currency known as the American dollar.
We do. It is known.
So that's my America fact, just for, you know.
Thank you, Cody. That was a good one.
You know what? I can't even say he's wrong. Holy shit, that got me.
Okay. All right, wait. Now we have to get to part 15 where the water dragon's bad at her job, right? That's the next one?
It is the next one. That's part 12. Wow, the water dragon in the Skyward Sword doesn't know what she's doing.
It's just honorary at this point.
Honorary. You should always be keeping it in mind. So, yeah, clearly wasn't able to flood, the Twilight Realm or something, do something useful, and instead allowed the Twilight to take over. So,
yeah, she's just so bad.
Yeah, terrible. And you rescue her, and she's like, "Oh, that doesn't count. Do another little thing for me." Anyway, we'll move on from the water dragon for now. And so part 14 is visit zeldawiki.wiki, but this one I've got an addendum, and it's called Install IndieWiki Buddy. So there's like a browser extension called IndieWiki Buddy, which makes it so that whenever you Google something, it crosses out the fandom results and gives you an alternative version on an independently hosted website. So IndieWiki Buddy, it's called, because fandom is a nightmare, and is also a big nuisance to just visit because it's full of ads and automatically playing videos and all sorts of things.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like the internal drama of the wiki community is one of the more interesting things that we catch up on every time you're on the show. With good reason.
Zelda Wiki went independent like last year, and since then there's been a few that have sort of taken off. I think the Minecraft Wiki and World of Warcraft and a few other big series have been having major discussions around the independence of their wikis. And I'll just finish with part 17. Visit zeldauniverse.net and zeldamaps.com, the websites that we run over at Zelda Universe. And we do have, some Twilight Princess stuff as well, and look out for all of the stuff about the Zelda movie that I'm sure everyone's gonna be speculating about for a while.
Yeah, for the next 12 years until the movie comes out.
Yeah.
Cody, what did you say? That was part 17?
Yeah.
Cool. This is part 18 of the Sacred Realms Rundown, which is provisionally titled Go Watch the Castletown animated short that was created by Rowan Link on YouTube. That's RWANLINK. That is, and it's a 20-minute YouTube video that's been teased for a little while. Rowan Link, I think, actually has somewhat of a history of doing Zelda animation on YouTube. But anyway, this particular 20-minute little short is a highly impressive take on what a Ghiblified, like Studio Ghiblified version of Ocarina of Time could look like if it were done by a major studio. This is one person who ostensibly spent about 600 hours working on this 20 minutes of animation, and it is a highly impressive interpretation of the events that take place post Deku Tree in Ocarina of Time. We've all seen the Studio Ghibli Zelda trailer, the fan trailer that's been floating around out there for the last several years, and it makes us all feel things, and we all love it. And this is kind of a next step, I guess, past that. Not done by the same person, but capturing some of the same sorts of feelings. And it's a highly impressive effort. This person basically made a whole scene in Unreal Engine and then rendered it and framed it with a cinematic quality, and the whole video is worth a watch. It's very impressive, especially for anyone who's a fan of Ocarina of Time, and it really has me sitting over here thinking once again why this movie that we are talking about right now is not being done as
an animated movie,
as an animated feature.
Yeah,
it seems really risky. I don't know. It seems like there is a really, really good path forward to making it an instant classic, depending on the style if it were done in animation. But that's not what's happening. But anyway, go check that out. It's a ton of fun. Matt and I had a blast watching it earlier tonight.
It was really great. Even Sawyer liked it.
He did, yeah.
And he knows almost nothing about Zelda, and he thought it was great.
Cody, have you watched it yet?
Not yet, but I am familiar with the creator who's done a bunch of stuff.
Cool. I think you'll enjoy it. I definitely would recommend you set 20 minutes aside to go give it a watch.
Amen.
All right. Well, I think that we have found ourselves now at the bitter end of the Sacred Realms Rundown, now going very close to 20 different installments. Who'da thunk it?
I mean, it's a Cody episode, so yeah, that's about right.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a super fun episode, Cody. We appreciate you joining us. And obviously, this is a fun one to talk about because whatever gripes we have, Twilight Princess, I think, can be considered tentpole Zelda, And so the conversations have to, the conversations are going to be interesting no matter what. I don't think anybody would consider this a side Zelda game, if there is such a thing. So regardless, once again, appreciate you coming back on the pod. We will be catching up with you again before too long in a new season of Sacred Realms. Looks like it's going to be Minish Cap. I know you said that you were looking forward to us suffering through another DS title, but I don't think you're going to get your wish on that. Is Minish Cap one that you have a lot of affinity for and are excited to get into a conversation about?
I think it's quite an interesting Zelda that I rank pretty high on in terms of handheld Zelda games. So yeah, I'd be happy to play through it again on my Nintendo Switch now that it's available on there. And and play along and hopefully have a in-person episode because I am heading to the land of the cowboys, land of the free, Texas.
That you are, and
it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's fun because, of course, we're going to try and line up your Minish Cap episode to correspond to an in-person recording, which is only makes sense. But I don't know, maybe we have certain other things planned for that time while Cody's in town.
We have some fun things that we haven't spoken about publicly, nor will we at this point in time. But be excited. Tease.
Should be pretty great.
We're teasing you, all of you who are still here, the few of you that are still here.
Consider this a tease. It's going to be really good. Cody, we will catch up with you super soon. And before that happens, of course, next week we're going to be having an episode with Cody's notable blood relative, switched at birth, Josh.
Long lost sibling.
Yeah, exactly. The family resemblance is incredible when you really look at them both. I've always said that.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Next week we'll be with Josh and we'll close out Twilight Princess. It's going to be a really fun time. And of course, the week after that, we will do a review and recap episode. And the week after that, we're going to go and start talking about an entirely new game. So great times on Sacred Realms Pod. But if you enjoyed today's show and you would like a little extra Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and become a patron. If you've got no rupees, it is not a problem. 5-star Apple Podcast reviews are a great free way to support us. More reviews means that more people see our show. That makes us very happy Hylians. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sacred Realms Pod for updates on the podcast and for behind-the-scenes action. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday with our thoughts on the finale of Twilight Princess. Can't believe I'm saying that. We'd love for you to play along with us and to share your thoughts on our social channels. Twilight Princess can be played in its original form on the Nintendo GameCube or on the Nintendo Wii. Its HD remaster can be played on the Nintendo Wii U, or it can be emulated on a variety of platforms, but we ask that you not do that unless you legally own the version of the game that you're emulating. But in the meantime, may your hearts be full, may your arrows never miss. Catch y'all next time. Sacred Realms is an independent, listener-supported podcast, which is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Lyndon Willoughby. Business operations are handled by Matt Willoughby. Our music is generously provided by Darknuck and is available to listen to on Spotify. Finally, we'd like to thank Nintendo for continuing to create such exceptional and innovative experiences.